So here we are on the really awesome website of SassMeister, and what SassMeister lets us do is write in some Sass here and have it come out as CSS here. So it's not like something like CodePen or JS Fiddle where we actually see a final result. This is just Sass on one side, CSS on the other, but it's done pretty much live, so we don't have to do anything. So just really quick, if I do body and then a font size of 50 pixels, it will pop out right there. So it's showing me pretty much exactly what I wrote, because in this case, we're not doing anything fancy. So one thing you might have also noticed is that the CSS looks exactly like the Sass that I wrote. And CSS, if just the regular CSS that you already know, that's actually valid SCSS. And SCSS is one of the flavors of Sass. We're going to get more into that a little bit later. But if you're writing CSS, it already is valid for what we're going to be doing. But you're not here to learn that. You're here to learn about how Sass is different from CSS and the cool things you can do with it. So let's take a look at 3 examples of things that you can do with Sass that you can't do with regular CSS to see why it's so awesome. For this example though, what I want to do is I want to take a look at nesting. So to get an idea of what nesting is, let's go and take a look. So I'm going to have here a intro. So my intro might have something like a background color on there. So say background color of light blue and some padding. 100 pixels 0, and it looks like you'd normally sort of expect something to do. But then in normal CSS, if you had a paragraph in here that you wanted to look different, so you had something like intro P, and you could go and of course style that and make the intro P look however you want. But instead of having to write it out like this, what we can do with Sass is I can come on here, I can just put my P right here, and we can do something like, font size of 1.5M, and we could give this a, let's say, color of dark blue to go with our light blue there. And so you can see here, I've nested it all together. So I have my intro starting here and it's ending over here. And inside of that, I have my paragraph, and that is giving me my intro as one bit of CSS, and then my P inside of intro as a separate little bit of CSS here. So it saves us writing a little bit of time by being able to nest things. And of course, we're going to look a lot more at how nesting works a little bit later on. So another thing that I really love is variables. And variables are actually one of the things that initially got me into Sass. And so this is, it's a little bit not exactly necessarily a real world situation, but you might get things like this. Where here I have my intro, I have light blue as a background color. My paragraphs are using dark blue as a color. And then I have a section 2 over here that has dark blue as the background and then light blue here. And what happens is maybe I don't want to be using that. I have an actual thing, or I want to just change it over to blue or something like that. And in this case, I only have it in 2 places, but maybe I'd have to change it in 50 different places in my website. So what variables let us do is I can write in dark blue is dark blue and light blue is light blue. And so what I could have here is I could just do it like this with the dollar symbol in front. And you can see here it's compiling and it looks exactly the same. But the cool thing with this now is I could take my dark blue and I could change this to an actual color. So I have a color right here saved. So you'll see by changing it to the dark blue here, so I've put in a hex code, it's actually compiled that out to those values here where I'm just writing in dark blue. So I don't have to remember a hex code either. It's really easy to remember something like dark blue. So anytime I need to use it, I just have to write dark blue and it's going to give me my dark blue. So the same thing with the light blue, I could come in here and put in a light blue color. And then everywhere that was put in light blue, we can see there and there it's coming through. And if I change that, and this actually should be an E, well, over here, it's going to change to the E and the E right away. So anywhere I've used that, it's updated through the whole site. Variables are amazing. And the last thing that I want to look at with you just for now as a quick example are the really cool functions that are built into Sass. There's some amazing functions that are built into Sass. So if I come and maybe my light blue, I want to keep it like this, but I want it to be transparent. So I have a hex code. Okay, so I have this hex code that I need to know the RGB value of because I want to use an RGBA. Well, not with Sass here. I can write RGBA, put my hex code in, and then put 0.8. And everywhere that had this as my light blue, you can see it's actually spitting out the RGBA and it's just doing it for me. I don't have to do it. Now, I could also have my light blue, maybe my intro, my background color, I want to keep it section 2, this dark background color here, I want to make this transparent. So again, RGBA, I could put my variable in there, comma 0.5, and it's going to just spit out an RGB value. So it's doing all the hard work for me. It's going and looking. First, it's getting the variable I used. It's seeing the hex code. It's getting the RGB value. It's plugging that RGB value in for me and adding in the A at the end there. So this is just one of the really cool functions that Sass comes with. There's plenty of more, and these are just 3 of the cool things you can do with Sass. There's so much more you can do with it. Sass really is CSS with superpowers, so let's jump in and start learning how to use it. As far as what software you need to be able to do this course, the only thing you need is a code editor, and I'm going to be using Visual Studio Code, but you can use any code editor that you prefer. One of the nice things about Code is that it comes with a terminal built in, and since we're going to be using this from time to time, it lets us having to skip opening up a separate program, and it's just a really good code editor, but if you're using another one, that's fine. Now, VS Code is free, and the link to it is in the notes below, but again, if you like anything else like Atom or Sublime Text, and there's tons of other awesome ones out there, so use whichever one you're comfortable with. If you're like me, you're on a PC, and that means we have an extra step which we have to take. If you're on a Mac, you don't have to worry about this. So that step is to install Ruby, which Sass is built on. So we need to have this on our computer. Now, installing Ruby is super easy. We just have to head over to this website here, which is linked down below, but it's just rubyinstaller.org/downloads. And we need to download the installer. So you'll see there's a whole bunch of stuff here, Ruby installers. Just really quickly, pay attention to what it says here, because right now it's saying don't use the Ruby 2.5. Use Ruby 2.4.x. So I have a 64-bit system, so I'm going to go with this one right here. And it will download in the corner. So once that's done, you can just click right on there. So I'm just we get this installer pop up. I'm just gonna click accept the license, click over to next. Now, one thing that's just important here, it should be on by default, but add Ruby executables to your path. Just make sure that is on. For some strange reason, it might not be. And then I will nicely just come here and click install. So one thing that is important when the installer finishes is by default there's this little checkbox run RIDK install to install MS or MSys2 and development toolchain. We don't need this. We're not working with C extensions, so you can just unclick that and click finish. If not, you have to run through another little installer. So I'm going to unclick that, click finish, and we're all done. Awesome! So if you're on a Windows computer, you've just installed Ruby, and if you're on a Mac, well, you've already got Ruby, so you could have skipped that last video. Now, we needed to do this because Ruby is what Sass is built on. So with Ruby on our systems, we can get into the scary world of the command line. Now, don't worry, it's not too scary. Now, there's a few different ways that we can do this. Now, if you're on a Mac, you're going to want to open up Terminal. So you can just open up your little magic search thing. I forget what it's called, and just look up Terminal. If you're on a PC, you can just do the same thing, but in your, your type to search thing down at the bottom, and write in CMD, which is going to open your command prompt. And you can do everything you want in the little command prompt here. Now, I'm going to be doing things a little bit differently because I'm using Visual Studio. Now, if you're not using Visual Studio, the command line or terminal work perfectly fine. So there's no issue with that. It's the exact same steps. One of the reasons I like Visual Studio, among others, is I can use my terminal that's built into here. If you are using Visual Studio Code, what you can do is push Control, or if you're on a Mac, Command, and the tilde key, which is the one right above Tab and next to the left of number 1. And that will open up this little terminal option here. So let's make that a bit bigger, and we'll zoom in a bit. And now all we need to do is type in gem install Sass. Now, if you're on a Mac computer, you might also have to write sudo at the beginning so that it can take, depending on how you're logged in, but you should just be able to type in gem install Sass. I'm going to push return on my keyboard. You may or may not get a little pop-up like this saying that, so I'm just going to hit allow access. So a gem is sort of like a Chrome extension. We have Ruby installed, but now we need the Sass extension of Ruby. It's not exactly like that, but more or less it's similar enough. So this does take a little bit. It's going to go through everything it needs and install all the different pieces that it needs. Now, once it's all done, you should end up back here where you can type in some stuff with your cursor. And just to make sure that it did work, what I'm going to write is Sass-V. And I'm going to push return on my keyboard. So that's going to tell me what version of Sass I have installed on my computer. And I can see it says Sass 3.5.4. So that means I'm on the newest version. Everything is running fine. I'm happy and I know it's installed. If it didn't work for some reason, when you type this in, the Sass-V, you could get an error say Sass isn't installed. So now I know that I'm on the newest version of Sass. And now next up we can explore how we can actually compile our Sass. So the first thing we need is a folder for everything to live in. So I'm just going to move this over a little bit so I can see my desktop, and I'm going to make a new folder over here on my desktop, and I'm just going to call it Learn SAS. You can call it whatever you want to call it though. And what I want to do is I actually need to move into that folder to be able to do some stuff. So the hard way to do it is to write CD and then try and navigate into here. The easy way to do it is to write CD, to grab your folder and just drag it into your terminal. Whether this is the command prompt on a computer, terminal on a PC, VS Code, it doesn't matter. You can just drag it right in there, push return, and it's going to place you inside of that folder. So inside of this folder, what I want to do is I want to create two new folders. I'm going to have one of them called CSS, and this is where the final CSS files are going to live. And I'm going to have another one called SCSS, which is where my SAS files are going to live. So inside of my Learn SAS, I have CSS and SCSS. Let me move that out of the way for now. And now what I want to do is I want to type in here SAS. So what I'm doing is I want to use SAS and put a space, hyphen watch, space. So I want SAS to watch. Now what do I want it to watch? I want it to watch my SCSS folder, which is inside of here, which is where we are. And I want it to go to my CSS folder. So it's SAS hyphen watch, the name of the folder where my SAS files are going to live, then a colon, and then CSS, which is where my final CSS files are going to live. And once I've typed all that up, I just push return, and SAS is watching for changes. Press Control-C to stop. So if ever you need to stop for some reason, Control-C. If you're on a Mac, I'm imagining it's Command-C, and it will stop. So now that your file is being watched, what you want to do is open up your folder in your favorite code editor. So it doesn't really matter how you managed to open your folder, as long as your folder is open in your favorite code editor. And I'm going to come here into my SCSS folder, and I'm going to make a new file. And that new file is going to be called test.scss. And that should open up. So I have test.scss. So in here, what I'm going to do, and you can see actually, as soon as I did that, you can see that new template detected. So it noticed SAS has already found that I created a new file, and it's created a couple of things. It's actually made a CSS file already, and it's made a map, which we're going to take a look at what that is a little bit later on. So here I have my CSS file, SCSS file, and then I have a CSS file here. There's nothing actually in this file yet. So in my SCSS file, just to see if this is working, I'm going to type in body and color red, just so we have something. I'm going to save that. It should say that it's detected a change. And now if I go to my CSS file, we can see that it has worked. Let's come back over to here and let's add something in here, and I'm going to nest it and just to see if this works. And this isn't something I would normally do. Color black. I wouldn't normally nest paragraph inside a body, but I want to make sure that it's really working. So I've saved that. And there we go. I have my body, and then I have my paragraph body. Now, one thing you'll notice with this is it's compiling it with an indented system, whereas here I wrote it completely differently. We can control how that is going to look over here, but we're going to look at that a little bit later. Right now, the good news is our files are being compiled properly, so that means we can start writing some SAS. So one thing that's important to know with your SAS is how it's being outputted, or that we have some options with how our CSS is being compiled. So on the left over here, I have my SCSS, and over on the right here, I have the compiled CSS version. So here we have my body, which looks exactly the same. You'll just notice that some of the white space has been taken out. Then I have my card, and then my card title. And I nested my card title inside of this card, and you can see that what it does is it's opening and closing it here. And then the next one is all here. So it takes out the trailing curly brace. So the curly brace isn't underneath. It's included with the last line. And it nests things together. So if this was nested here, it keeps it nested just for visual reference. This is the default way that it's going to behave. But if you do want to change the style of it, you can. So we do have 4 different styles that we can choose from as well. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to clear this. Oh, I need to cancel this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop this. I'm going to do Control-C. Do you want to terminate? Yes, I do. And let's do a clear. So we have 4 different options. There's a nested, there's compact, there's expanded, and there's compressed. And I figure the best way to show them to you is just to take a look at what they all are. So the way that you're going to decide which one you want to do, and again, nested is the default. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write Sass, and then my watch, SCSS to CSS, like we've already done before. But then what I can do is I can also add -- style, and then I can choose which one I want. So nested is the default one, so I'm not going to do it because that's what we already saw. Instead of that, I can choose compact. So let's do that and see what happens. So I'm just going to make a small change here. I'm going to save this, and it's going to save it. And now this has been compacted. So you can see that everything only takes up one line. It's just taking out all the empty spaces pretty much that it can, even though it will keep some empty space between different things. So let's cancel that now. Yes. Now the next one we can do, I'm just going to push up on my keyboard because it's going to bring up the last thing I wrote. And instead of having compact, let's try compressed actually next. Compressed. Now that it's working, I'm just make a change and save that. And this is going to take out every white space. This is sort of like minifying your file. So it's just this one big long line. It's taking out every single possible empty space there is. So that's the compressed one. And it's, like I said, that's like a minified CSS file pretty much. And we can cancel that. Yes. And the last one we'll look at is expanded. And what expanded is going to look like is it's going to look sort of like what you'd be normally writing CSS like. It's keeping the curly brace on its own line afterwards. It's not tabbing things over here and putting them all together to show indentation or anything like that, or nesting that was coming from here. So this is more of what you traditionally be looking at in your CSS file. So you can choose which one you want. I tend just to leave it on the nested. I don't, in general, look at my CSS file. I'm only using my SCSS files. But those are the options. You can set it up to use whichever one you prefer. If you're using something like Prepros or CodeKit, you also have options in there. If you go into the settings of how Sass is working, you could choose to use one of these as well if you prefer one of them over the other. So another important thing to know is what this thing underneath is doing and where it's coming from. So this is an option in Sass called a source map. And you could turn this off if you want to, but I wouldn't recommend it. It was new in Sass version 3.3, and it's been a real big help. And in the browsers, we used to have to go into the flags in Chrome and enable stuff. And oh my goodness, it was such a mess. And now it's so easy to be able to do stuff. It's incredible. So I've made a really, really simple file here just to show you what it is. And I've also done it in the compressed version. So we just have this one big line of CSS instead of having multiple lines of CSS here. So if I open this up in Chrome, I have my very amazing looking website right here. And if I go and I do an inspect element on this, you'll notice I click on my H1 and it's actually telling me where that is coming from in my Sass file or my SCSS file. So I see scss.scss line 6 and body is starting line 5, line 6. Same thing over in Firefox, inspect element, and let's actually get my H1 there, and it's saying in this case on line 5. And the reason it knows where that's coming from is because of this source map right here. If I delete this line and I save my CSS file and I refresh over here, you're seeing it's looking at scss.css, so it's only looking at my final compiled CSS, and it's saying that it's on line 1 because everything is in line 1. This makes it impossible to find the problems in your file. If something's not working, and this is going to be telling you it's on line 36, but line 36 means nothing in your final CSS file because you want to know where it is in your Sass file. So that's why it's really important, and it's going to make troubleshooting a million times easier if you leave this source map on. Now, source maps are on by default. If you're on an older version of Sass for some reason, they might not be, but if you've been following along, you're on the newest version of Sass, everything should be done automatically. You shouldn't have anything to worry about. They should just be popping up all on their own. And to see what this really is, we can go and look at the map itself, and it just looks like this. So it's nothing that we really have to worry about. It just works in the background and does amazing things. So later on, this is going to make your life a lot easier. So it pretty much just wanted to explain why this is showing up and why it is so useful. Now that we've looked at how to compile our Sass manually, I do want to show you a few other tools that you might want to look at that can compile it for you automatically. The first one here is CodeKit. This is Mac only. It's really well known. It's very popular. Not only can it compile your Sass, it can do a whole bunch of other stuff as well. This is Mac only. There's also Prepros, which is very similar to CodeKit, almost identical in a way in what it can do, but this one is... The big difference here is it's also available on PC, and I have used and continue to use Prepros. I really like it. Again, these two do a lot more than just compiling Sass. They compile the Sass. They'll also minify things. They use Babel for JS if you're using some advanced features, and a ton of other stuff, minifying, auto-prefixing, a whole bunch of stuff. These are both premium software though, so you do have to pay for them. And the last one, which is actually free, is Koala. I've never used Koala, but I've heard a lot of good things about it. This, again, will compile Sass for free. It also uses other languages such as Less, CoffeeScript, and Compass. A little bit more limited to the other ones, but it's still a very useful and cool tool. So if you really think the command line stuff is too much, you can definitely try one of these out. Again, Prepros, I'll give full credit to. I like it. It's an awesome program. It's the only one I have experience with. The one thing with this, though, is that the command line might seem kind of intimidating. We're not going to do anything crazy with it, but in the real world, the command line can be used quite a bit, whether it's for Git or other things. And it might be something that's worth just exploring with and getting used to, but there's no prerequisite on doing that. You can use one of these software if you want. You will be getting the exact same results. So whichever tool you decide to use in the long run, that's completely up to you. Just wanted to show you that there are alternatives to writing things in the command line. Before you start writing Sass, you have a decision to make. Sass has two different syntaxes, which can be a little bit confusing. There's the original, known as the indented syntax, or simply as Sass, and there's the spin-off called SCSS. And the reason it's SCSS is that it's Sassy CSS. Now, one thing, just a really quick thing here that some people can get really annoyed with, Sass isn't an acronym, so it shouldn't be written in all uppercase. It's just Sass, and that's why we have SCSS, which is all capitals, because they're taking Sassy CSS and just making it into SCSS. Now, Sass, which I have over here, is the original one, and it was meant to reduce keystrokes. You'll notice there's no semicolons anywhere, and there's also no curly braces anywhere. Personally, I love this way of writing it. It's how I first learned how to write it. I find it a lot cleaner, it's more elegant, and it's easier to read and to write. Now, with our Sassy CSS over here, it takes all the awesome things that Sass introduced, but it keeps the same syntax that you've grown to love with CSS, so we still have the curly braces and the semicolons. Now, you can do the exact same thing with both versions of it. There's no right or wrong one to learn. And once you learn one, you'll be able to figure out the other one without too much issue, and it's not like you're going to get stuck or that you can pick the wrong one. Now, I mentioned that my first love was Sass like this, but for this course, I am going to be using SCSS. First of all, it's easier to understand right out of the gate since it looks a lot like CSS. Also, it's much more prevalent. Frameworks use SCSS, tutorials on the web almost exclusively use it, and even the documentation for Sass on their own website defaults to this one just because of its popularity, though you can hit a little tab and switch over to the other one if you prefer it. As for which one you should use, as I mentioned, SCSS is way more popular and prevalent. If you're like me, you may love the elegance and look of Sass, or you just might like the idea of having less keystrokes to write. Or you may like the comfort and familiarity of SCSS. There's no wrong choice, and they both have the same powers in the end. With that said, you'll have an easier time following along if you use SCSS because some of the things are written a little differently between the two syntaxes. Sass makes things a little bit shorter, and even though in the end the results will look the same, and I will try and highlight at times when things are a little bit different between the two, my main focus will really be on the SCSS way of doing things. So hopefully you know all about CSS comments already, so it's nice and handy sometimes to leave yourself notes in your CSS. Sass supports CSS comments, so obviously if I come in here and I write this is a comment, once that compiles, you can see that my comment has come into my compiled CSS over here. Sass also comes with its own type of comment, and the way you do this comment is //, and this is a Sass comment. Now, the Sass comments, if you're coming from JavaScript, you might recognize them because you don't have to close one. This is just a single line comment. It also doesn't compile to the CSS. So this is compiled and it's not showing up over here. So this can be useful when you want to leave your self notes, but things that won't reach the final compiled CSS at the end. So if I came down here and I said, this is another one, again, nothing is showing up over here. I tend to use these all the time. These are super useful. I'm using the Sass comments. First of all, they're easier to write. And I just, yeah, they're awesome. But just if you do need a multi-lined one, every single line needs it. Because if I come on to a next line, it's no longer a comment, and that's going to compile through. So just to watch out for that. Every single line you do would need to have a comment. So multi-line comments, you still have to do that. Whereas here, I could do a multi-line comment, no problem, and it works, and it's all one big comment. So just the difference between the two of them, this will compile into your CSS, these don't, and these are single line comments only. Nesting is a powerful feature of Sass, maybe too powerful. So a word of warning, I'm showing this to you, but you have to promise you're not going to abuse it. This can lead to a big rabbit hole of nested selectors and some really bad CSS. So with that said, we can also save a lot of time with this. So here's an example of something we might run into a lot. We have a navigation, and a navigation, one thing with it is we have a lot of repeating going on. We have nav, then nav ul, because you want to make sure it's only your list that's inside of your navigation, and then your li, and then your a, and then maybe your a hover, and maybe you have some weird effect going on, so you have your before and some afters and some other stuff, and it's all just inside of your navigation. So what I could do is I can take this nav and then I have my nav ul, right? So instead of writing it out like that, what I could do is right after my light green background here, I could come in and write ul and then just start writing inside of here. And I could do margin 0, padding 0, list style none. And let's delete this out of here. And I'm going to hit save. And you can see it compiled it all together. Now I'm on the nesting one, so you can see that it is nesting it for me, but this is opening here and then closing there. So I have my nav, which is the same as what I have here, and then my nav ul. So this is on its own right there, and that's coming out and being its own styles all together on there. So then I could do the same thing with my nav li. When you're writing it, now copying and pasting it obviously seems strange, but just having to write li like that instead of having to go back and do something else, display, I won't write it all out here, but inline block. And then let's just delete this for the moment and hit save. So now I have my nav and then my nav ul, my nav li, my nav a. The reason this can get dangerous and that you can get into a rabbit hole of stuff is you can nest things a lot deeper. So I could have my ul, and then in here I could have my li and do a display inline block. And then I could come on this and do an a and do a color of red, let's say, and save that. And now I'm getting my nav, a nav ul, and then a nav ul li, and a nav ul li a. And it's getting really, really deep, this nesting. And for a navigation, maybe this isn't the end of the world. But for a lot of things, this could be problematic. If you have classes inside of classes that are all nested, do they really need to be nested? Be careful with it. Try not to nest more than 2 deep. Some places will say 3. If you need to nest 3 deep for something, okay, maybe. But my general rule of thumb is to try as much as possible to keep things like this. I have my main selector, and then I have some stuff nested inside of that. And that's as far as I try and go. But that's just for regular nesting like this. We're going to see in the upcoming videos some awesome other ways that nesting can be really powerful as well. So I just want to go over once again the difference between Sass and SCSS, because SCSS, this is where one of the big differences comes. We have the missing semicolons, but there's the whole principle of nesting, which is where Sass is built around. So what's really important with actual Sass, over here, I don't really need to indent those, and even the spacing on these was completely optional. I could write it like this if I wanted to. I could even write things out like this, and there's going to be no issue. It's going to compile, and I'm fine. It's really hard to read, but hey, it works. You can't do that with Sass. When you're in the regular Sass, sometimes you might do something like star and then select one thing, I don't know, margin 0 or something like that, and it's the only thing you want to change, so you leave it on one line. You can't do that here because the way this is compiled is it's using the nesting to know what's going on. So anytime there's an indentation, so this indent here, this is saying there should be a curly brace and then a close curly brace type of thing. So here, then I get another selector and then I tab back over. So this, let's just undo here. This is the exact same thing that I wrote over here. So you can just see it's all done with the extra indentation. Now, one of the nice things with this is, say you want to change the way your nesting is done. So I'm just going to add the A over here. So I have my nav, UL, LI, and A. And actually, to really show how this is working, let's just open up my... so I'm just going to open my compiled CSS up here. So what I want to show is here. Now, I can just select all of this, push tab and move it over, select all of this, push tab, move it over, push save. And now it's nested deeper. So now my A is inside my LI, which is inside my UL, which is inside my nav. And then I could take this, shift tab to go back, save that, and right away my A has gone out one step. And then I can select both of these, shift tab to go back, hit save, and you can see right away it's been compiled and I'm playing around with it. So it makes it really easy to change how things are nested without having the curly braces to select and to delete and stuff like that. So that's the big difference between Sass and SCSS. There are other things like mix-ins that are written a little bit differently, but for the most part, they're really almost identical. Now, this is one of the last times I will be looking at actual Sass. Most of the focus, again, will be on SCSS, but when we do mix-ins and extends, I'll probably just show really fast the syntax on it, but it'll be in the same video and I won't be, but I thought this was a nice opportunity really to look at the big difference between the two of them. So now that we know how nesting works, where nesting really starts to get powerful is when we're using the ampersand. The ampersand unit, which is this thing right here, which is also Shift 7 on your keyboard, that is used to reference the parent selector. And this is really, really cool. So just to show you, and I'm going to do a really quick thing here. Say I do parent, background is yellow, and then we do and then I'll just do child, and we'll do background is green. Save that. And so I get parent, background yellow, and then parent, child, background green. And that might seem really familiar to you because that is really similar, or actually the same thing as doing parent, background is, let's just do a different color, red, and then in here just doing child, background is, and we'll do purple on this one. So this and this look identical. What the ampersand is saying is reference the parent. So it's going to take the parent and it's going to plug it in there. So it's going to say parent. So I'm pretty much taking this copy and just like pasting it in there almost. Now where this can be useful is when I'm nesting like this, I don't really have any control over it. It's going to come out this way and there's nothing much else I can do. Whereas right now it's looking the same. But if I go and I take this space away and I hit save, well, now it's parent-child, which now it's not really a child. This would be more useful for something where you're modifying it. So say if parent and then like is open, is open, like that. So say you're using some JavaScript or something like that. So you have a normal state and then you have your is open state. So I'm just doing ampersand and then no space is open. So that's kind of cool. Another place where this is really, really useful when it comes to our pseudo classes, our hover, or active, or visited, and all of that stuff. Because I can't just come in here and write hover and do background is, let's just make it yellow. It's not working. Because now it's putting the space there, which I don't want. This doesn't make any sense. That's not going to work properly. So instead of that, I just put my ampersand. So ampersand hover, and then I have my hover colors. Not sure why background's actually coming up in that weird color there. I'll just do background color so it looks normal. There we go. And then we could have and active, and I could have a background and have its own color as well. So let's just say background of, what would be color? Background color of, I don't know, green, whatever. Save that, and you can see it's all coming out the way you'd sort of expect it to. So button hover, button active, etc., etc. So this is really, really nice for pseudo states. You might also be noticing it's not nesting it inside of here. It's doing it as its own class down here. And this is really, really useful. If you're used to the BEM naming convention or just creating modifiers in general. So let's say I have a secondary button. So I have your primary button, your secondary button. you might be, if I come in here and I just write dot button secondary, and let's give that a background of pink. It's doing button secondary, which that's not at all what I want. So, we could come in here and then just do the ampersand, right? So now it's doing button and button secondary together. But where this gets really useful is, let's just take all of this out. When I do the dot, it knows it's another class. So this would be button and button secondary on there. But if I don't have a dot here, so instead I do a dash, or if you're used to the BEM naming convention, a double underscore, and I save that. Notice how it's not nesting it inside. It's not doing a button dot button secondary. It's not doing a button inside of button secondary. It's just creating its own class outside all on its own. And this is really, really nice and really useful. So I'm not actually nesting things unnecessarily. I'm just creating different pieces of something, and their specificity is the same. And if you're at all familiar with CSS, you know that keeping specificity, the reason we want to prevent nesting is to keep specificity normal, so it becomes easier to overwrite things. So somewhere this might be really, you might see this a lot. Background of just a light gray, then with a padding of like 2M on it. And then in here you might have your card title. And my card title, I could have a font size of 25 pixels, let's say. And then I'd have my card body, and that could have a font size of 15 pixels. And then we could have a card footer that has a background of black, color of white, and a font size of, 10 pixels. Let's just, I'm just coming up with something random. But what it's doing here is it's not nesting everything in. It's not creating weird things. It's giving me this nice, really clean CSS. And it makes it so I don't have to write card over and over and over again. And card's nice and short, but sometimes you might have something longer here. Or you might have a special type of card, or you might have something else. And, sometimes these selectors do get kind of long. You might have card secondary even. You don't want to have to write card secondary every single time. So now it's card secondary, and then card secondary title, and card secondary body and footer. And I'm not having to rewrite things. And this is really, really useful. Let's delete all this just to get rid of it so it's out of our way. And look at another way we can do this with the ampersand, which is really, really handy sometimes. And this is, say I do my card again, and I give this a background of yellow. So I'll save that. So this is my normal, we have to scroll up a bit. There we go. So this is my normal card. Now, maybe I have another part of my website. I have like a call to action or something like that. And I don't want to have to write a whole new bunch of CSS for it or something like that. So I could actually do my call to action, space, ampersand. And on this one, do a background of pink. So again, the ampersand is referencing the parent selector. So this is really cool because this is going to say my card inside of call to action. So if I save that, again, it's giving me two different pieces of CSS. The specificity is higher on this one just because the card is inside my call to action, but it lets me reference things in a different way. The ampersand doesn't always have to come first, which is something that not everybody always realizes. So this is really, really neat, and another cool way we can go about using it. So the ampersand is a really powerful thing in Sass, and it's what makes nesting super awesome. I honestly think that without this, that nesting within Sass could actually cause more problems than it solves, but because of the way the ampersand works, it can just make our lives so much easier, and it's a really useful tool. So this is one of my favorite things, even though I don't use it as much as I should, but it's when we can nest properties. So when you have a bunch of selectors that all start with the same prefix, something like font or text or background, you can nest them. So I know background's a shorthand property, but I could write background, and then I could actually write and then nest this, and then do image, and do URL image.jpg, and then have my size, and do cover, and then save that, and you can see it's doing background-image, and then background size cover. So the font's another shorthand property, so we'll skip that one, but what about text? Text isn't something that's shorthand, so I could have text, and then I could do transform, uppercase, and then align center, and then even shadow 003 pixels, RGBA black 0.2, let's say. Save that, and look at that. Isn't that amazing? And I misspelled transform. Text, oh, whoops. This should be text transform. There we go. Save that. And just, it's that, again, it's not something I tend to use a lot of the time just because I forget about it, to be honest with you, but it is a nice way to be able to go about it. It also depends on how you like to write your CSS, just because sometimes this can be really useful if you're well organized. You're doing all your text things together and all your background things together and all your font things together, and anything that might be repeating the same prefix. But if you're more aléatoire, where you're sort of doing one after the other, and you're just sort of doing them as you're thinking about them, maybe you won't use this. And that's, I think, why I don't use it as much as maybe I should. But it's still a really cool, useful tool that, it just saves you, it just like most of SAS, it's saving you a few keystrokes, and it does actually in a way keep things a little bit more organized, because it's keeping all of your text properties together, all your background properties together, your font properties together, and all of that. So another cool thing that we can do with nesting. Variables are what first sold me on SAS. Now, instead of trying to explain what a variable is, let's just see how it works, because I think that's a lot easier. So here I have my SAS, and well, it looks like regular CSS, but I've used the same colors throughout the site in a lot of different places. I have the same CCC here, I have it there, I have it here, the same with the 333 color for my text, and it's also a background color up there. So it's finding itself repeating in a couple of different spots. And pretty much this is a pretty small style sheet. So even though it's such a small style sheet, these numbers are repeating themselves quite a few times. And well, this layout's kind of boring and not very nice looking. So we want to change it a little bit. So what I could do is I could come up and actually make a few things here. So I could come up with two variables. So to write a variable, we do a $, and then we put the name of the variable that we want. Let's give one of these the name of light gray, and that one will be my CCC. And then I'm going to have my dark gray, and that one will be my 333. So what I can do is, anywhere that I was using the CCC, I can replace that with light gray. And anywhere that was using the 333, I can come through and replace this with dark gray. So there's not too much to do here, but let's just do those quickly. Light gray. Whoops, that one should have been dark gray. Light gray. And I think there's one more left. There we go. Light gray. So now if I refresh this, it should look exactly the same. Nothing at all has changed. And if I go and I look at the compiled CSS of this, styles, you can see that there is no variables at the top. So I have these two variables. In my compiled CSS, they're not there. And at the end, the body has the CCC in the 333. Now, the reason this is more convenient, because right now you're going, well, you just wasted a whole bunch of time going through and changing them all. But now if I come up here to my light gray and I change this, so let's say, you know what, maybe I want this to be a little lighter. Let's make it EEE instead. And I save that. Let's go look, and actually let's just refresh. And look at that, they all got lighter at the same time. The title got lighter, this color got lighter, and that color got lighter. So if I come in and I look here, this here is changed, it's changed there, and it's changed over here. I go, a bit too light. Maybe DDD would have been better. And I save that and I refresh, and it changes all of them at the same time. And the same with my dark one, my dark gray. And let's just make it really stand out. It doesn't make much sense because it's called dark gray, but let's just make it red, refresh, and you can see it changed here and there, and everything has changed. Anywhere that was using my dark gray is changed. And just to really reinforce it, come up here and say purple. And refresh, and you can see anywhere that was using it has changed over to purple. So variables are something that we can define one time, use them throughout our CSS file, and then easily be able to make modification to that and make massive changes. And this is one of the groundbreaking things that will just change how you write your CSS. It's something that you can really leverage and is extremely powerful if you use it properly. So continuing off where we were before, here I've come and just added another one, light blue. In this one, I want to highlight how we can also use variables inside of other variables. And this is a really common thing to do. So here, these aren't semantic names. These are names that are sort of just describing what they are. And what you'll often find is that you'll get names like this, but then we'll also come through and use those somewhere. So you might come after that and say something like the background, or let's just say BG, is going to be light gray. My text color is going to be the dark gray. And my accent is going to be light blue. And then throughout here, so background would just be BG, and this would just be text color. So this, in the end, gives me the exact same CSS that I had before. It just gives me a bit more of a semantic naming convention in the sense that I can use BG for my background color, text color for my text, accent anywhere I need that light blue color. And then even if I have to make a change, because at one point I might change my color scheme and I might go, you know what, I actually want to inverse these two. So my background and my text color, I could switch them. My color scheme is staying the same, but these are changing. Or I might just come through and switch these colors out and keep this all the same. Yeah, it's not super common that you might need to do something like this. One thing you might want to do is you might want to come up with a gradient because gradients are kind of annoying too. So say you do BG gradient, and then that could be, and then we could do our whole gradient in here. So linear gradient. And I could say we could do light gray, dark gray. So I'm using both of my variables inside of another variable. And then here on my background, I could actually put this to BG gradient, save that, refresh, and now I have a gradient in my background. And then this is something that could actually be reused in a bunch of places. So then say I also came on here for my article, and I said that my background should be BG gradient here as well. Refresh that, and I go, oh, it's okay, but I'd rather my gradient is actually going to right. And now the background over here switched, and all of these switched. Now my website's getting uglier and uglier as I make some of these changes, but it's just to highlight how we can use our variables inside of variables, whether it's just straight up like this, or whether it's in more complicated things like this. Which it can be very useful to do. So especially for making gradients, it's actually really, really useful. And to make your gradient into a variable is super useful because it just makes it really easy to reuse and to modify your gradient later on in your sites. All right, so we're back in SassMeister, which we haven't seen in a little while, but I think it's a nice way to show this just because we have the instant upgrade, like instant visual of how our CSS is going. And what I want to look at is how variables are affected by the cascade, and they cascade just like anything else. So here I have my primary is red, and then my H1 color is primary. So as you'd expect, you get that. So let's say then I came and I said my paragraph also has a color of primary. So as you'd expect, you have red and red. Now, what would happen if I said that here my primary is blue? Well, the first one is red because my primary is red, and then my second one here, the primary becomes blue because it's cascading down. So it's saying primary is red, my H1 is primary, so this works. And then it's going to say, okay, well now my primary has been redefined as blue, so my paragraph is using primary. Well, what is it? It's going to blue. Don't do this in your files, please, please, please. As we're going to see, the way we organize most of the time is all of our variables are in one place, in one file, all by themselves. So doing something like this where you're redefining variables, it sort of defeats a lot of the purpose of it. But it is something that it is possible, so I just wanted to definitely show you it. We can also do other things. I can actually redefine the variable inside of my selector. So if I did something like this, this actually does work. So primary blue. And then just so you know, if I came down and I said, after this, let's just say that my H2 has a color of primary, what do you think it's going to be? Primary. If you're coming from JavaScript, you might be thinking it's going to be red. And look at that, it is. So this is actually getting scoped inside, it's getting scoped to the paragraph. So because it's inside of my paragraph where it's being defined, it's only keeping it inside of there. And my H2 here is keeping this one, which is a global scope. So this is affecting everything. And this one here is only affecting the paragraph. And so yeah, just to show you that there's two different ways for it to cascade down. And just to be careful with this can be super useful. Just so you know, it can be super useful, but it's something you want to be really careful with, because in general, we like keeping all of our variables in one place just for simplicity's sake. Alright guys, it's time for the next challenge. So this time what we're going to be doing is you're going to be trying to recreate this card. Now I've given you the HTML already, so all the markup is done. The style sheet is linked, so it's looking here for a file in a CSS folder called variablechallenge.css. Doesn't exist yet. All I've given you is the SCSS file with the same name in the SCSS folder. Now, if I come and look over in the variable challenge folder, this is what I'm giving you as far as the SCSS goes. There's nothing too crazy here. I've given you the 3 colors that you're allowed to use. So those are the 3 colors that are being here, including the hover that's in there. The white is a color. It's like a little bit darker than white. So one of these is that. One of them is this brown color, and one of them is the blue color that we're getting on the hover. All the colors, the box shadow, and let me turn word wrap on here. So all the colors, the box shadow, and the border radius should all be set up as variables. And because they're variables, that means you can't use this down here. You have to use the variable anywhere you're using it. So your border radius, your box shadow, because you can see here there's a box shadow on the box, and there's a box shadow here on the hover. And the border radius that's on the buttons, and this is the same border radius, so it's one variable that you can reuse throughout. As far as what you're already starting with, we have just a box sizing border box up there, some general styles on the body, a very, very basic little style here on the card, and a very, very basic style here on the button. For this, there's no actual new classes that I want you to add in here. If you need to add something in the card, you have to add it in here. Now it can be nested, and we have here our card title and our card text. So if you need to select any of those, you can use nesting and the ampersand in there, and the same with the buttons. So it's just to reinforce what we already know about nesting, but add the variables on top of that as well. So this is what we want it to look like when you're done. Right now, it doesn't look anything like this. You're going to be starting, it will be floating in the middle, but other than that, you do have a little bit of work cut out for you, but it shouldn't be too tough. I will be giving you the finished HTML and CSS that I had, so if you need to reference the CSS, you can, but I'm not giving you my SCSS file. You got to figure out on your own, so good luck. Okay, so we're going to be taking a look at operators. Now, when I first show this to you, you might be going, well, I don't get what the point of these are. We're going to get more into them later on when we start getting into functions where they can be more useful. But pretty much what it lets us do is do some basic math as well as some other things inside of our CSS. So here on my body, I just have a font size of 20. But what I can do is I can say 20 plus 20, 20 plus 20 like that, and then my font size becomes 40. And I can add pixels to one of those, and now I have a font size of 40. And again, you wouldn't actually write it this way, but it's just to show you can do it. And if I do 20 pixels here, I get the same result. One thing you cannot do with this though is you can't mix units. So if I did say 1em plus 20 pixels, that's going to give me an error. You cannot mix units. You can use the calc function from regular CSS to be able to mix units if ever you need to do it. Now, so you can do any numbers you want. You can do a plus. Let's just change this to a smaller number. I can also subtract with a minus. I can also multiply with a star. Oh, but one of them in this case can't have pixels because it's doing pixels times pixels. So if you're doing multiplication or division, only one of them can actually have a unit on it, because 20 pixels times 20 pixels would be pixels square, and that just doesn't work, right? So now I have 200. Now, if you're doing a division, I can't do it like this. You'll see it says outputting it like that. And that's because CSS allows for this unit. This unit is used in CSS from time to time. It's not very often, but it is in there. Say you're doing your font and line height together, you put your font size and then your line height. So this does not get accepted. So if you want it, you have to have parentheses around it, and then now it will work. So now it is doing the division. Or if I had another thing in here, so say then +5, now it knows that it's doing math, so it treats this now as an actual division symbol. So either if you only have a division, you have to have it in parentheses, or if there's other operations going on, you go ahead and it will just work by itself. You can also do the % symbol, and of course that won't work. Let's make this like 3, and that will give me the remainder. And we can also, funnily enough, do some colors. So say I came on here and I said the color, I could do red plus blue, and it gets magenta. Or I could have, let's just say F5E plus DA5, and well, it comes out to white. What if I do a minus on that actually? And there you go. So you can add and subtract number or colors together as well. And this is actually more of a function than it is a operator exactly, but I won't get into the difference at the moment. So you can do the same thing. You can do that. I can do division. I don't know if I'll get anything out of this. Might be black. Oh, there we go. Close to black. So you can do all of the same things with colors as well. Now you're probably looking at this going, well, what's the point of all this? Why would I ever be doing this? And if you ever get into using advanced functions, this can actually be kind of useful. If you're coming from any experience using JavaScript or other programming languages, and you know a bit of what a function might be, you can imagine that sometimes you are doing math and stuff like that. You can also do comparisons of greater than and less than. So I can see that that's coming up as true, or I can get false as well, but this doesn't make valid CSS. So again, this is things that will come up a little bit later. But all of this isn't terribly realistic, and especially right now. So in the next video, we're going to take a look at a more realistic example of where this could be really, really useful. All right, so you probably watched that last video and go, okay, I get that operators can add and subtract and all that stuff, but where would I actually use that in the real world? And outside of the functions that I sort of mentioned before, you can also use them really well just for setting up your dimensions on things. So say you're given a design and it has a container, and you know that the max width of that container is 1170 because that's what you measured in the Photoshop file or whatever design file you were given. And you know that you have a main section in here. So we have our main. Whoops. And you know that there's also an aside, or a little sidebar on the side. And for your main and your aside, you want these to have widths on them. But you're not really sure exactly how big it is because, well, this has a maximum width of 1170. This is a responsive site. It's going to change, it's going to grow, and it's going to shrink. So what I could do is I can give this the width. So I know in the actual design that I was handed over, the width of this is 700 pixels. Well, 700 pixels isn't going to work. So I need to figure out what percentage 700 is of the 1170. Luckily, it's really easy to do. I can do 700 divided by 1170 pixels times 100%. In this case, the division's working with the pixel and pixel, and I said you can't mix things. It's because pixels divided by pixels means there's no more pixels, right? And then times 100%, so it's giving me this as a percentage. And then I can go to my aside now, and I can give that the width. And on this one, maybe it was 300 divided by 1170 times 100%. And now I have the two of them that are coming up with their widths. Those are going to be percentages of the container that they're living inside of. And I don't have to manually do any math myself. I don't have to open my calculator app or anything like that. So in things like this, that can be really useful. You might know of the calc function in CSS, and you could actually do the same thing in here, but it's a little bit faster to be able to write it this way, and it works perfectly fine. And this is just one of the many ways that you will be able to use operators in your code. Alright guys, it's time to take everything we've learned and actually build something using it. So what I'm going to be asking you to try and do is build this pricing table for this fictional website company. So it's the plan hosting, it's a little pricing table thing. And I've given you this layout. I'm also going to be giving you this, which is our colors that we're using. This, which is the hover effect for our button, so the normal looking button and then the hover. So we're adding a drop shadow to it and we're also increasing the size. And I've given you all the font sizes and the font that we'll be using. And in the description to the video below, you'll also find the import for the Google font, which is the Railway, which we are using. So what I'm going to encourage you to do is try and do this as much as you can on your own. I think the best thing to do would be to watch the next video where I'm going to be writing the markup. With all the markup done, what I'm going to do is encourage you to try and create your own variables and then watch my variables that I create in the video after that, and then we can code it along together for the last part. Okay, so we're doing this one from scratch. So the very first thing I'm going to do is make a new folder, and let's call this pricing table. Call it whatever you want though, of course. And I'm going to open up my pricing table, and in here I'm going to create a new folder called SCSS. And I'm going to open this up in VS Code so I can start hacking away. Now, because I am in VS Code, I'm going to open up my terminal and I'm already in the right place. But if you're not and you're using your other one, just remember CD, and then you can just drag your folder into here and you'll be in the exact same place. And what I'm going to do now that I'm inside of this folder is write sas --watch space SCSS CSS. So we'll be watching our folder. If you don't do this step right away, it doesn't really matter because we haven't started writing any yet, but I still like doing that right from the start. Now what I can do is come in and I'm going to make a new file this way. And I'll just call it pricing table.html, which will be the focus for this video. Just to speed things up a little bit, I'm going to use Emmet, but only for this one step. After that, I'm going to write everything out, but I'm going to do an exclamation mark and then push tab. If you're using VS Code, Emmet comes pre-installed, so it's going to work out of the box. If you're using something like Sublime Text or Atom and you don't have Emmet, just go look for the extension and you can add it right in. It's very easy to set up, and I'll put a link down below in the description as well that talks a little bit about Emmet. So let's change the title here to pricing table, and let's add a link right away. And just to show you once again for Emmet, if I write link and I push tab, it just puts everything there for me. So I'm going to eventually have a CSS folder, which will have pricing, let's just call it styles. Styles.css will be my final file name. So now in the body here, I'm going to bring up my design and make it a little bit small, just to put over on the side here. So I'm going to be using the BEM naming convention just because that's how I like to work. If you want to use different class names, by all means you can. So the first thing I'm going to do is just come in here and create a section with a class of pricing. Even though we're just building this one thing, it's still, if this was part of a larger website, this would be how we would be naming it. So then in here, in my entire section, what I need is, I need to have my H2. So my title is going to be an H2, and that is plan hosting. And then after my H2, I need my pricing table. So for that, I'm going to make a whole div that's going to hold all of them. So that will be class equals prices. And now inside of prices, I'm going to have the individual price divs. So I have prices is a container that's going to be around all three of them. And then inside of prices, I'm going to have div class equals price. So I have my prices that's going to hold all three of them, and then each individual one of these will be a price. So eventually I will have 3 different divs like this one. Now inside of my price, I'm going to have an H3, which will have a class of price title. And this is where I'm coming in with the BEM naming convention. So this is a my price is a component, and then the title is part, an inner part of that pricing component, so it gets the double underscore. And that one is free. So after my price title, I have the list of items here. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4 items that are going to be in there. So I'm going to use an unordered list to do that. So that's my UL, and it's going to have a class of price list, which I think makes sense. And then inside of there, we'll do an li class of price list item. And my price list items we need to have 4 of them. So copy that, paste, paste, paste. And let's make this a little bit bigger for the moment, just so we can actually read the text in here. So actually I put, your version will be updated because this should be one domain, 5 GB of bandwidth, and I'll speed this up just because it's kind of boring to watch. Okay, so there we go. Then I need the actual price itself down there. So we have the UL. So after my UL, I can come in and we'll just make this a paragraph with a class of price. Let's call it cost, I guess. I'm not sure if that's the best name, but we'll do that. So it's $0, but then this is big, and then that part will be small. So in here, we'll put a span, and we'll do per month. Per month. There we go. And then out after that paragraph, the last thing I need is my button. And so I'm going to come down here and put in a link. Now I do need to have 3 of these. I'm going to do that off screen just because you don't need to see me. I'm just going to copy and paste this a bunch of times, and then you'll catch me on the other side where we're going to be starting to work on our variables. Okay, so I've gone and copied and pasted my prices a few times. So you can see here, I've also added comments just to make it a little bit easier to see where I am. So I have price 1, my tiny is price 2, and then my third one there is price 3. And the one thing I'm going to do here is on my second one, because my second one looks quite a bit different, I'm going to come on here and do price, not rice, price accent. And this isn't a mistake. I'm purposely putting hyphens here instead of underscores because this isn't a subcomponent of my price. It's a modification of my price. So that's why I'm using hyphens. So I'm saying it's a modification of my original price style. So with that done, I'm going to save my HTML file, and I'm ready to open up and create my Sass stuff now. So in here, I'm going to come and say, in my SCSS folder, we'll make a new file, styles.scss. And when I do that, I create it, and right away, I get my Sass all coming in with my Sass map and all of that stuff. And the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to write all my variables. Now, if you're following along, you can follow along exactly with this, but what I'd encourage you to do is try and do your own variables for everything I've given you. And I make it a little bit easier because I'm making pretty much a variable for all the different things that I've included in the files I've given you. So I have my colors, I have my font sizes, and I will be doing a few other things. But what I'm going to encourage you to do again is to try and come up with your own variables, see how many you can come up with, and a way that works. You could even go and style the whole thing if you want. So just pause this video now, try and do that, and then when you're done with that, hit play again and see how it compares to how I create my own. See if there's things that we did the same, if you did things differently based on either naming conventions or variables that you did or didn't create and all of that. And then from there you can follow along with the rest of my build. Okay, so whether you're following along or you've already done your own, I'm going to start writing mine now. So one thing I do like to do is write Sass comments at the top of all my variables, just to be able to keep track of the different sections, because I do end up with quite a bit of variables. So I'm going to start with my colors, which is what I tend to do, but there's no rule or anything like that. So here in my colors, let's just do white. So that one actually just is white, FFF. I'm going to have my light gray, which will be RGBA 000.35. I'm going to have my dark gray, which is RGBA. Might as well just copy this. Copy, paste, and that should just be 0.5. And last but not least, we have my green, which is 72B01D. There we go. Now what I like to do is I like to give these names that make it a little bit easier for me. So I'm going to do color accent, which is my green. So one of the reasons I like having color accent instead of just having green is it just makes it easier for me based on the naming conventions I use. If you just want to use something like green throughout your site, there's technically nothing wrong with that at all. It just comes down to how you like to work. So it just sort of comes with how I like to work. So I'm also going to have a color body, and that one's going to use the dark gray. And I'll have my color heading, which will use my color accent. So my heading colors will use my accent colors, my body will use the dark gray. So here again, I'm using a variable inside a variable inside of a variable. It's a little bit of variable inception going on right there. Do you need this one? Not really. But again, this just comes down to a little bit of how I like to work. Next, I'm going to do my typography. So for this, I have my font family. So I mentioned before, I like having like a font family sans serif or serif, or you can write serif. In this case, I only have one font, so I just tend to write FF for font family. And it's Railway sans serif. And I forgot to bring in the Google code, so let's grab that, import. This can go all the way at the top still. I have included that to the description of all the videos in this, so you can go and grab that if you didn't get it before. Now I want to work on my font weight, so let's go find my font. So I have bold, regular, and light. So I'm going to do a font weight of light, which is 300. I'm going to do my font weight of normal, which is 400, and I'm going to have my font weight of bold, which I believe, let's just go look quick. Yeah, 3, 4, and 7. So 700. 700 right there. So that's for my font weights. And then I'm going to have my font sizes. So I'll have font size, and I have a few. Now, normally I have a lot more than this because I am doing a full website. In this case, we're only working on one thing, but I still have a heading too. So I tend to have H1, H2, H3, and all of those, but we only have an H2 for the moment. So the font size on this one is 48 pixels. Now, I don't like working in pixels, I like working in rems, and this is a really nice place where you can use an operator. Generally speaking, a rem is 16, unless you go and change your root font size and stuff, so I just tend to work with those. Now, I don't mind working just with rems, but to make the math a lot easier, because dividing by 16 can be tricky, we can actually do a little bit of math. So I could say 48 divided by 16 times 1 rem. So I'm doing the 48 divided by 16. And the whole reason I'm doing times 1 rem at the end here is just to add a unit. Because if I just did 48 divided by 16, it's going to give me just a unitless number. And if I put rems on them, the rems sort of disappear with the math. So times 1 rem is just so I get my unit at the end. So I can use this for all my font sizes. Body, I think I have 4. So this one will be my body's font size. So my body's font size is 24. So this would just be 24 divided by 16. The next one, I have this really big font. So I tend to have something like extra large. So my extra large font size in this case is 72. And I have this one, which is smaller than everything else. So it's smaller than my body. So I tend to call that small. And that will be 16 divided by 16 times 1 rem. I could just obviously write 1 rem. That would work fine too. But just in case I want to change it, I'll leave it like this for the moment. So this is a cool way that we can use operators in the real world starting right now. Now there's other things that I didn't really include in here, but if you look at the word heading and you look at the button here, there's letter spacing on them. So I have some letter spacing and all of that. So I like making a variable for that if I do have letter spacing, so ls for letter spacing. And I'm gonna start with something where like 5 pixels. This is one place I don't use em or rem, just because it can be a little tricky. So I'm gonna start with that and we'll modify it as needed. For what we're working on now, it's overkill, but I want to show you how you can use this in your layouts as well. And if you're working on a really big system, it can be really good. So I'm going to make a helpers section of variables as well. So I don't expect that you created something like this. This is something new, but I'm going to create a spacer. And for now, I'm going to put it as 1 rem, and we're going to come back to this at the end, and we're going to see how this spacer can really help us out. Another thing that we have is our box shadow. So just like LS, BS is box shadow. And for this, I'm going to do 0, 0, 1 rem, and I believe light gray for my color. So this is the box shadow that is on these and also on the hover effect of my buttons. So because I'm using a box shadow on these and I'm using it there, I'm using it more than once. So it becomes useful because writing all this out gets kind of long. You forget what size you used. Was it 10 pixels? Was it 15? Was it whatever? And even, why don't I use spacer in here for my size? So I'm using the box size, the border box shadow is 0 pixels, 0 pixels. So there's no offset. The blur of it is my spacer, and the color of it is my light gray. So let's save that, and let's open up our pricing table and see what it actually looks like too. Okay, and whoa, look at that, we got an error, and this is the first error we get. This is fun. So it says invalid CSS after green. Expected selector at rule was this instead. So I thought my green, it was weird that it wasn't working. Oh, and it's because I forgot my semicolon here. So if ever you do something that's wrong, it is good to know that you can get an error that pops up, and it always tells you where it is. So line 7, and then you can find it on line 7, and it tries to tell you what's wrong. And if you know anything from computer programming, if line 7 is where the error is, it's usually the line before that that's often causing it, because I made a syntax error for getting the semicolon here, so it made this become an error. So if I save that and I refresh over here, there we go, it's working. And it took a long time just to set all of this up, but in the next video, you're going to see that, whoa, man, it just goes really fast now once we start working and having all of these things set up. And this is on one component. All of these aren't specific to the component I'm building. These are just general things that could be used on my entire website. So even though for this one component that I'm building for my pricing table, this could be used throughout a whole website. And just once we start writing the actual Sass, you're going to see that having all these variables really does help out. All right, so right now this is what our website looks like, and we want it to look a lot nicer than that. We want it to have the nice table that we have here. It's not really a table that I'm building, but still, we call it a pricing table, right? So I'm going to come back to here, and let's start doing some coding. So helpers is done, so now I can actually start writing some CSS. So let's start with my general styles. And the first thing I usually do on almost all my websites is just do select all, box sizing, border box, just because that's handy to have. It just makes life a little bit easier when you're dealing with your padding and stuff like that. All right, then on my body itself, we'll do our margin of 0, and let's set up what we need. So I need to have my font family, so font family, and this is where it's really easy. You don't have to remember anything anymore. You just put in, FF font family. And again, if you had a serif or sans serif, you don't have to go and start copying and pasting stuff. Font family FF, it just goes nice and easy. Font size becomes font size body, and color becomes color body. And this is why I like putting the prefixes on these, color. I find it makes it easier to remember exactly what I'm doing while I'm writing them. So if I save that and we go back over to Chrome and I hit refresh, right away things are starting to come together. So that is cool. So the first thing I'm going to do, we'll start from the top and work our way down. So let's look at our H2 here. So we have my H2, and my H2, well, we need a font size on that, but we've already got that set up. So font size is font size H2. My color in this case was color heading, and you can see depending on your code editor, the variables start popping up and become selectable things, which is super, that speeds things up even more. You just have to write CLR. You see all of the colors you might be using. It makes it even easier just in case you didn't remember a name. So again, the prefixes, I'm a big fan of using them if you can't tell already. For on this, we need some letter spacing too. So letter spacing. And we also need to be uppercase. So we'll do a text transform uppercase on there. And let's go see what this looks like. Refresh, and that looks pretty good. I'm happy with how that looks. Cool. I'm wondering, can I squeeze this down like that and then just squeeze this over? It's going to be kind of tiny though. Maybe we could leave it a bit bigger. Just so we can see all three things at the same time and make our lives a little bit easier, right? Okay, so there's my H2 done. Now, let's just move our way down. So the next thing is my pricing table thing right there, right? So we can start off with the whole thing, which was pricing. I don't think I need to do very much with my pricing, but let's just give it a text align center. And yeah, we'll start with that. Save, refresh. Good enough for now. We have our prices, so dot prices. So remember, the prices is going around all three of these. So I'm going to do a few things on this. The first one is just give it a width of, I don't know, 95%. A max width of, say, 1200 pixels. Now, normally, I also want to have a display flex on here. So display flex to make my 3 columns. And you can see it is working. It's just they're going to be really narrow, especially because my screen size is so small right now. So I'm going to comment that out for the moment, and we'll come back and do that after. But we're just going to style the card itself because it's going to be easier to see what we're doing. So on the card itself, we had our price. And you might notice I haven't actually been nesting anything so far. The variables are SAS stuff, but I haven't been taking advantage of the fact that I could technically do this. And it's just because I want to keep the specificity of my selections as low as possible. When we nest selections, it can cause problems. So we will be nesting some stuff as we go, but it is something that we just want to be careful with in general. So on my price, so this is each individual price thing here. We have a few different things that we want to do. Let's give it a background. I think it's just a background of white, just because I want to put a box shadow on this and I want to make sure that there's no issues. So I'm going to take that and do it. And then we need a box shadow, and we just need to put BS. I don't have to remember what my settings were or anything like that. I just have to do that, hit refresh, and now I have box shadows on everything. So that is awesome. I also need to put some padding on it because you can see that there is this nice big spacing all the way around. And I could just come up and guess a number, but one of the reasons I like having my spacer helper that I created was for all my spacing on anything, I can use that, and that just sort of keeps a consistency with your spacing. So my padding, let's try 4 times spacer. So I don't want to have just 1 unit of spacing, because 1 unit would be almost nothing if I did 1. You know, my padding's not big enough in this case. So I'm thinking like 4 or 5 might be more in the range. And I mean, I made the design, so I know it's closer to 5. But it's just to show that we can, you can use the spacer for consistency. So you're not just randomly getting numbers all the time. You're always sort of focusing on the scale. So, 16, 32, I can't do math in my head right now, but you understand. And you could even make your spacer unit smaller. You could make it 8, and it just gives you a bit more granularity in all of your spacing and all of that. Again, it depends on the design you're given, but this can be really, really useful to have. All right, and now we get to start taking advantage of some nesting because I want to select my title. So we're going to do ampersand and title because I want to select the title right here. And let's just give this the color of color heading. And I'm going to refresh so we can see that it changed. Now, just as a refresher, what the ampersand here is doing, if I go and I look at the compiled CSS, is that ampersand is it's taking the name of my parent selector. So again, this actually isn't nested. You can see that this is price is living all on its own, and the price title here is living all on its own. So they're 2 separate things. It just makes writing things a little bit easier. And it's one of the really nice things when it comes to naming conventions and stuff. When you're prefixing everything, SAS just makes prefixing everything really, really nice. So, and title, I can change the color. I also want to come in here and do my letter spacing. So ls, and it gets that. My text transform, of course. Text transform, uppercase. There we go. And I think that's good. Now we want to move on to my list. So I can do and list. And because this is just one component in the whole thing, I could have just selected my UL and turned off my bullets and all of that. But I'm treating it like this is just one part of a website, and I want to style it really individually. So my list margin of 0, padding of 0, list style of none. So I'm just resetting it, taking off any original styles that it might have had. There we go. The things are gone. All the extra spacing on that will be gone. And I can keep going. Now, if you look at here in the actual design, let's zoom this in a little bit. I have these little gray lines that are in between. So I'm going to look at my individual list item to do this. So I'm going to do and list item. But I don't actually have any styling to do on the list item itself. The font size is good, the font weight is good, the color is good, everything is good, but I do want to put in these lines here. And to do those lines, I want to use some pseudo elements. So inside of my list item now, I can add in another ampersand and say after. So I'm going to look at what the compiled Sass is for this in just one second, but let's style it. So if you're not used to pseudo elements, I do have to give it the content. And we'll also do a display block on here. Height will be 1 pixel. The background will be light gray. And let's just save that and refresh to start with. So we can see that we have these lines. Oh, it looks too dark. We'll have to go and fix that after, but I get these gray lines popping up. My shadow looks a little too dark too, so maybe I'll play with my light gray. So we can see that those lines are there, which is awesome. That's what I want. And I want to space them out a little bit too. So again, I can use my spacer. So margin will be something, let's say spacer times 2 and 0 for the left and right. So I'm just putting these in parentheses. So it's taking my spacer unit and I'm multiplying it by 2, and that's giving me one number. And then this is so this is top and bottom margin, left and right margin right there. Save that and hit refresh, and now it's spaced it all out. So if we go and look at the compiled CSS of what this has done, you can see that I have my price title, my price list, and then my price list item after. So even though here I have list item and then the ampersand again, it's not creating some crazy thing because I have an ampersand and then an ampersand inside. What it's doing is it's just taking this as if this was dot price, and then it's taking all of this and it's putting it right there. So it's doing this type of thing. That's what the ampersands are doing in this case. And it saves me a whole bunch of keystrokes, and it nests it in a really nice and convenient way. So my price list item after, and it gets all of those properties on it. As I mentioned, it does look a little bit too dark, and I'm using my light gray. And if you look at the shadow here and the shadow here, my shadow also looks too dark. The numbers that I gave in the original file were what I used in my design software, but since it looks too dark, I'm going to make a change here to my light gray, refresh, and my shadow got lighter and the line got lighter. And even let's drop that down maybe to 10%. That's more of what I was after. I'm not worrying on the fact that they're so wide right now, just because once they go and line up next to each other, the whole card pricing thing will be smaller, and then it should fit quite a bit better. Cool. So get started. No, we need the price first. So let's go down and fix our price. So that will be right here. I can get rid of that. And I can come and do and cost. Actually, before I do my cost, I just realized something. I have an extra line here on the bottom that I don't have in my design. So this is my after. I want it to be after all of my list items, except I don't want it to be after the last list item. So we can do something here. It's a bit more advanced, but I can do not. And then in the not, I can put another pseudo class, which is last of type. So I'm selecting all my list items except the last of type and after each one of those. So I'm going to save that, refresh, and it just takes that one off. So we'll go look at the compiled CSS again. So price list, item, not the last of type. So all of them except the last one in my list. And then I'm creating an after pseudo element on them. So that's a nice little trick that you can do for something like that. So let's go back to here and work on cost. So the cost is nice and simple, and this one is a span, so we're going to nest that. So I'm going to do my font size. On this one was font size extra large. The font, whoops, 1F in font weight was font weight bold. The color was color accent. And let's just refresh to see how that's looking. Cool, but obviously this, we don't want it to be so gigantic. We need that to be a lot smaller. So for this, I'm going to come in and do span, and I'm just going to nest it in there like that. I'll fill this out and we'll look at the compiled CSS in a second. So my font size on this one, I think, was font size body, either that or small. And actually, I just realized I've been doing like font size, font weight. I might as well talk about this. We can do font, and then size is font size body, and my font weight is font weight light. So again, this is, we'll look at how that compiles out now. So I'll save that. Let's refresh. It looks good here. And we'll come over to my styles. So I can see I have my price cost, I have my cost styles, and now I have my price cost space span, and then I get those span styles that I put in, and this just comes out to font size, font weight. So even though here I'm nesting it font and then size and weight as inside of here, it's just going to prefix it automatically. Now, one thing that's important to notice here is because I didn't use the ampersand, I'm just nesting the span inside of this area. The span itself becomes price cost space span. Whereas here in the areas where I'm using the ampersand, it's not actually nesting the price cost or my price list and all of those inside of my price. It's making each one of these an individual selector that's not nested, so it's not raising the specificity on those. So for one of the last things we need to do is to work on our buttons. So for the buttons, I'm actually going to come all the way back up. I had general styles and then I stopped doing things. So let's come in here and say, this is my pricing table. Buttons are something that would normally be used throughout a site. So I'm going to give them their own section here. And because they're used a lot, I'm keeping them closer to the top. So let's just go and look. I just called it button, and then did I just have button, button, button? I did. I'm going to add on the second one here, button accent, and come back to here. So for my buttons, I also didn't do the green one. We'll do all the accent stuff together at the end. So on my buttons, I have to select my button and just some general styling. So display inline block. And I'm going to add some padding. So let's do padding. And again, this is where the spacer unit can be handy. So instead of trying to guess numbers, I can come up with my spacer. And let's just copy this twice, actually. There we go. So I'm doing spacer, space, spacer. But I'm going to multiply them by different numbers. Now, in general, the height, the spacing on the top and bottom is bigger or smaller than the spacing on the left and the right. So here I'm going to go with like a 1 times 1.5. And for the left and the right, let's try something like 2.5. And don't forget the multiply. Save and hit refresh. Oh, and I need a background color so I can actually see that that worked. So background of accent color. Save and refresh. And that doesn't look too bad, except it's a little bit too tall, I think. So we're just going to go with spacer on the top. I think that looks a little bit better. We need to have a few more things on here. So we can do my text. And I need two different things on my text. I need a transform of uppercase. And I need to have a little decoration of none. Decoration of none. There we go. And I'm actually going to make this a little bit bigger, times 1.5. That looks good. I need it to be bold, so font weight is font weight bold, and my color is color, or it's just white in this case. Good, good, good. And I think my font size is actually too big. So font weight and font size. Font size should be font size small. And letter spacing. Letter spacing. Spacing of letter spacing, LS. Refresh. There we go. That looks pretty good. I'm happy with that. Good, good, good. So now we also want to have the hover effect on our button. So if I go and find my buttons, it goes from, oh, I put the wrong color. Whoops. Background should have been dark gray. And refresh. Okay, so it's like that. And when I hover on top, I want it to get bigger. I want it to change colors. And I want to add a drop shadow on there. So I have my button. And then what I can do is ampersand hover. So my button hover. And on my button hover, we want to have a box shadow. And we already have that, so box shadow. And this, I really like that, you know, for some of these, the color is the spacer. Maybe you're thinking it's a little bit of overkill, but for things like box shadows or colors and stuff like that, my goodness, is it so much easier to remember. The background, when we hover, should be the accent, like I had it before, so color accent. And I want it to be bigger, so increase size. So for that, I'm going to use a transform, and I'm going to scale it up by 1.22, according to the design file that I gave you guys. So let's save that and hit refresh. And there we go. We can see that it is working. So it's working, but I don't want it to just jump. I'd like to give it a little transition. So up on here, I'm going to add a transition of all, ease out, and how fast should it go? I generally like these pretty fast, so we'll try 200 milliseconds and we'll see. Save, refresh. There we go. I think that looks pretty darn good. Now the transition, this is the only place I'm using it, but this could be a nice thing that you could also create a little helper class for. So you might have transitions on a lot of different elements, so you could just bring in this and make it really easy to transition everything that you need to be transitioning without having to remember what speed you actually used or what ease function or whatever these are called, the ease in, the ease out, ease in and out, or the quadratic or whatever it is. So this is another good one to build one around. So I think that looks pretty good. Now we want to go and make all of our accent stuff. So we have this accent one over here to go and create. So for that, we have a bit of work to do. So let's come down and start first with my price. So I'm going to go with my price. I'm just going to go all the way down to the bottom. This is where my price closes, because I know that it's all on its own. Pricing starts on its own. So I know that this last one is the end of my price. So on here, we'll do and accent. So I'm choosing my accent pricing table thing now. And actually for this, I think we should go up to 3 columns to be able to properly see what's going on. So before I keep going, let's come all the way to here. And I said that we wouldn't have this on. So we'll do display flex and I'll hit refresh, and it gives us the 3 columns. So that looks a little bit better. Now, one of the problems with it is they're stuck together. So we can use our spacing on that. So price, margin. Actually, I want only 2 of them should have a margin. So if I do margin left, it's going to give them all a margin left. Yeah. So this is a nice little trick that you can use. And I'm just going to make this bigger because I don't really need to look at this anymore. So this is a really nice trick that you can use for if I want to only have the margin on, I'm going to do a margin left, and I only want this one and this one to have a margin on it. So I could use the whole not thing again, but I can also just do this. Margin left of spacer. And you might be going, what is that? So let's refresh. and you can see that I have my margin there and there. Now, I'm not making a super responsive website, I have some side scrolling, but this is really convenient because what's happening there is that's compiling out to price plus price. So if its sibling has this class name, this one will get this property. So this one has a preceding sibling that has this class, so it gets a margin left. This one has something before it with the price class name, so it gets it. This one here doesn't have a sibling before it with that class name, so this one does not get it. And once again, Sass makes it really easy to write ampersand plus ampersand, and you get this nice, really useful selector. Okay, so with that out of the way, I think we can come and style our the accent one here. So if I come back to here where we started the accent, there's not too much we need to do. We just need to overwrite a couple of things. So the first thing we'll do is our background. So the background on this one should be color accent, which is our nice green. And there we go. So we get that nice green color. Now I can't see some of my text, so I will need to fix that. So for that, I'm going to do ampersand space dot price title. And I think I can do both of them at the same time, actually. Price cost. So let's do a color of white on those, and I will explain that now. So we can see that that did work. They popped in. Now, the reason I put the ampersand and then price title is because I do want these to be nested. So if I come and I look at how that compiled out, I have my price accent, and then I have price accent title, space price title. Now I can't use the ampersand here, because if I did, if I did something like this, and I save that, and I go and look, what that's doing is price hyphen accent underscore title, which is not what we want. So in this case, I want it to be price accent space price title. So it's getting the title that's inside of only my accent one, and it's getting the cost that's only inside of my accent one. And this is one of the few times where I do believe that it's worth it to nest a selector. Cool. So I think that is that. Oh, there's the spacing thing that I mentioned. So for this, I do want my padding on the top and my padding on the bottom to be bigger. So if you remember before, my spacing on those, I think was 5. Yeah, I did spacer times 5 for the overall padding on the whole thing. So what I want to do now is I want to come on to this one. And I want to make the padding on the left and the right will stay the same, but I want the top and bottom to be different. So let's do padding top. And instead of 5, let's try spacer times 7. And then the padding bottom will be spacer times 7. So they're the same. And I'll save that and we'll hit refresh. Now what that's done is it's just moved everything down. So I need to pull that back up at the same time. So I'm going to do a margin top. And I'm just going to do spacer times -2. And the reason I'm doing 2 is because I had 5, 6, 7. So I have an extra 2 that I'm dealing with. So I just wanted to pull it up. And that's not big enough. Let's do 8 instead. And that should be -3. There we go. So I get that space there. Now because it's display flex, I'm not getting the right spacing on the bottom. They're sort of touching the bottom and everything. So let's just come and fix that really fast. So on pricing, I'm just going to add some padding to the whole thing. I don't know. I'm just going to make a big number right now. That's going to be too big. Not too big of a number, but just so I have some space at the top and some space at the bottom. You can see they're all lining up here at the top, the bottom together, and that's because of the display flex that's on here. So just to show you, let's add a background of red. So you can see they're stretching to fit the whole height. So even though these aren't as tall as this, they're stretching to fit, which is why things are lining up all sort of weird. So what I want to also do on here is I want to make sure that their height that's not happening to the height. So I can do a justify content center. is not the one I want. Actually, I want an align items flex start. Whoops, flex start. So that means they have to start at the top of the box and they won't stretch. The default for that is stretch to fill up the whole thing. So I'm switching that over and now they're not stretching anymore. I do have one weird little artifact on there though. Oh, two weird things. That should be centered. Oh, with that, I never did my margin 0 auto to center it. There we go. Now the one problem is this is on 2 lines, this is on 2 lines, and that's only on 1 line. This is not the best way to fix something like this, but I'm going to just put in 50 BR on all of them just so they line up properly. BR, save that. There we go. And now they all line up with each other properly. So this sticks out the top and it sticks out the bottom. Of course, that will look much better once I turn off the red background. There we go. And that looks pretty good. On here, obviously that's a bit of a thing. That's my prices. Let's just give this a margin on the top of, I don't know, 100 pixels. That looks better, right? I'm just putting a random number in there to fill it up. I know I'm not using my spacer like I have been using. Now, the reason that this is also working really well is you can see that it's actually lining up these all along the top. So that's, again, I want those to all line up at the top, and I wanted all of these to line up down at the bottom. So I did that all by using, here my 8, so 5, 6, 7, 8. So by doing the -3, this is my extra, and then this is the same on all of them. Good, good, good. The only thing that's missing now is my accent button. So what I'm going to do for that one, let's go find my buttons. There we are. So for this, I'm going to do it very similar to how we did it before. I can come on here and do my ampersand accent and give that the background it needs. So the background in this case is white and the color, was it gray? I don't think it was gray. I think it was the accent color. So let's refresh that and see how it looks. Yeah, that looks better. And then on hover, obviously now I can't see it, so I want that to change on hover to the dark color. So once again, I can come in here, ampersand hover, and I can give that the background of dark gray, and I can give this a color of white, save that, refresh, and there we go. Awesome. So there we go, it's all done. We used lots of ampersands in here just because that makes our lives so much easier, especially if you're using prefix naming conventions like I was using. We used a little bit of nesting with our span and a couple of other things, such as this down here at the end. And of course, we went crazy with the variables. So with the variables, it just becomes a lot easier to remember writing light gray instead of writing out a whole RGB A value, or remembering color body, color heading, instead of trying to remember even if it's green or something like that. So it can be useful to have variables nested as variables, and just prefixing things like this I find makes my life a lot easier in the long run. Alright, so we're going to be taking a look at extends, but before I start writing any code here, I just want to say that extends are a little bit controversial. They're not popular and they're not very widely used out in the world. They're sort of ignored, and there's good reasons to ignore them, but they are part of Sass, and I want to introduce them to you, and I want you to make up your own mind on them, just so you know they're not part of my workflow. But there's something that I really loved for a while. I kept trying, and I still do every now and then, sort of see if I can't integrate it in one way or another. But let's take a look at what they are. We're going to worry about what they are, how they work, and then we're going to look at why people don't like them afterwards. So let's say we have a button that we want to style. So on here I have my text transform. We want to make it uppercase all the time. And also we want to take off, say it's on a link, we don't want to have any text decoration. Then what else can we do to it? We can, most of the time we want some buttons. We want some padding on our buttons. So let's give it a lot of padding. And here display inline block, because that's usually what you'll do. And there we go, I have my button. Now, you might have more than one button, and then you're retyping the same code all the time. And one of the nice things about Sass is you type a lot less. It lets us do just a lot less writing and getting a whole bunch of CSS out of it. And that's one of the places you get that is with extends. So primary button. So I have another button here. And then what I can do is an @extend, and I write in what I want to extend. And you'll see what it's done is it's added primary button to my selector here. So I'm selecting both my button and my primary button in my CSS. And this is really, really cool. And this is a nice, concise, and sort of good practice way to write things out. And you're probably thinking, okay, but I don't want them to be exactly the same. And they don't have to be. I can just come down here and give this a background of red. And it puts it down on its own over here. And say color black, just for fun. And so any shared properties, well, anything that was part of the original one in the extend get grouped together. And anything that's unique and that I'm adding on after the fact gets put down here. So I think that's pretty cool. And just to show you, we can call this one secondary button and make this one blue with white text. And you can see that that's all really cool and good. Now, one thing you'll notice is if I have a black here and a black here, it is still separating them because they're not inside the extend. If I knew every single one of my buttons would have a black color, I could take that out there and put it up here on the original one. So I'd only have to have it the one time, for example. So anything that's in the extend, just it groups all together, and then you just add your own properties afterwards that you want. And this is really, really handy. It pumps out some good quality CSS on this side because it is a good idea to group stuff like this. So yeah, it's a really cool thing, and this can be made even better, and you'll see how we can do that in the next video. So we're back here with the exact same example I had before, and one thing you'll notice is I have this dot button here that I probably wouldn't use on my site. I'd use my primary button, I'd use my secondary button, but I'm not going to use this one that doesn't have any background color on it. So what I can do is, instead of using a period, I can put in this thing. I can't probably, the percent symbol, they have a different name for them. But I'm getting an error now because here I just need to replace that with this, and here replace that with this, so it knows what to look for. Now what this is called is a placeholder. So this isn't outputting anything. If I remove all of this, there's no CSS coming out. So this is a placeholder called button. So it's holding all of these things to be used for later. A little bit like how a variable works. If I have a variable here, blue, that doesn't actually make any CSS. It's saving this little thing for use later on. So a placeholder is sort of the same idea. And the whole point of placeholders is to use them with extends. They literally exist to be extended. So I'm using all of my common properties, and then anywhere I need to use those, I can do it like this. So I get my shared properties all together, and then the things that are separating them out over here. And I love how this works. The idea of placeholders to me just makes so much sense, and I really, really like how this works. Now, I think it's also important to realize that you're not stuck with just the basics here. All the powers of Sass that we've used so far can be used inside of this. So I could come up and take a variable here. So let's say I have black is 0 to, or not, that's really dark. Let's just say it's 333. And then here where my color is, I could use black. And let's say I want to hover. I can do and hover. So again, this is going to take the parent selector and then add hover to it. And maybe we want our button to get a little bit bigger, so we could do a translate scale 1.1 or something like that. So my button gets a little bit bigger when we hover. So you'll see here, it's taking, I have my 333, so it's grabbing my variable here. And I also have the hover that I put here is being pulled down and used here. And again, this is grabbing my parent selector. So my parent selectors are primary button and secondary button. So it's adding hover to the end of both of those. So that's really cool. So just don't forget, if you are going to be using these, that use the full functionality of them so you can write less code. So one of the problems with extends is that they don't really work with media queries. Now there's ways of getting them to work. You can there's a trick to do it, but it's a little convoluted and not really worth you bothering with, because there's better alternatives that we can use instead. If you really want to know, hit me up on the Slack channel and we'll talk about it. But what we can do is, so let's say I have my link like this, and then for some reason inside my media query, So at media min width of 900px, because why not? I have all my links are going to become bold for some reason. I don't know why I'd want to do this, but let's say all my links inside of my media query are going to be there. I'm going to do an @extend link. And I got an error. You may not extend an outer selector within a media. You may only extend selectors within the same directive. So this means that if this were living inside of here, there's no issue. Let's just delete this away. There we go. Now it's working because they're all living together in the media query. But that wouldn't necessarily be realistic, and then it gives me an error and it doesn't work. So this is just one of the problems that we can run into with extends, and this can happen unexpectedly. I know this is not really a realistic example of something you might be trying to do, but it's just to say that it doesn't work, and all of a sudden you will run into something like this at one point or another and be like, oh, I shouldn't have done it that way. I should have done it some other way. And there, as I've mentioned already, there's alternatives. We'll be looking at them soon. So one of the problems that comes up with extends is the way they deal with inheritance. So while if you're writing really good CSS, you probably won't have something like this, but stuff like this can come up definitely. So you might find yourself one day in a scenario like this, where you have your normal links, then you have a different, a different style for the links that are in your modal, and you have a different style for your links that are in your sidebar. And that's all fine and good, but then say one time you want to extend this link thing onto your buttons as well. So you have let's say a call to action button, and you want your button to look like your other links. So on this button, you come and you say, well, I'm going to start by doing an extend of link, which makes sense. But oh my goodness, what just happened? And I'm going to slide this over because it's not doing a text wrap. And this just made some crazy selectors here. So the first one here at the top makes sense because we're extending links. We have link and call to action button. So that's exactly what I wanted, and that's working. But what it's also doing is, because it has a link here and a link here, it's extending those ones as well. So what it's doing is on the next one, it's looking at this. So we have modal link. Then we have modal space call to action space button. So what it's effectively done is taken this off and replaced it with what I have here. And then it's done the same thing again, but this time with call to action, then modal, then button, which, it starts getting kind of weird. How this is coming out. And then the exact same thing is happening down here. So I have sidebar link, that's fine. Then my sidebar call to action button, and then I have a call to action sidebar button. This is kind of weird, and it can start spitting out, this is only with 3 selectors ahead, that all of a sudden it can start spitting out some crazy stuff. Now, in general, I wouldn't necessarily suggest organizing CSS this way anyway, but it's just to show you that things like this can happen and sometimes give you these crazy things that the whole point of extends is so it's outputting less CSS and can help keep our file sizes smaller, but it can lead into these crazy scenarios with these crazy selectors, and you might even be inheriting properties that you didn't want to inherit in the first place. You only wanted to extend this, and all of a sudden you're getting all these other things too, and in certain situations you might end up with an uppercase or blue button that you didn't want. So just to be careful with your extends if you are going to be using them, and watching out for outputs that come like this. One way that you can avoid stuff like this is by saying modal link and sidebar link. And then on here, we can just use our extend on all of these. And then you won't have any problems because this is only looking for the class of link. So even though I'm extending them here, it's not reusing them. And I think this is just a more organized way of writing things. It just means when you're writing your markup, though, you do have to be paying a bit more attention to how you're writing your markup and not just using link for everything. And, this didn't necessarily have to be link. This could have just been an A throughout the whole thing, for example. And anyway, I think you get the idea. So just be careful with your extends if you're using them in your projects and trying to avoid really crazy things like that from happening. Mixins are bits of code that allow you to reuse one line of code throughout your website. They're a little bit like extends in this way, but they accept arguments, which really push them to the next level. Now, before we worry about the whole arguments thing though, let's just look at a basic example of how they work. So write a mixin, it's a little bit like writing a placeholder, except we actually have to write @mixin to start with. So it's @mixin and then a space, and then I write the mixin name. And that can be any name you want. And then you have your curly braces where you write in the code you want. So let's just say I do color red. And just like a placeholder, we're not getting any text outputted over here. It's just coming out as there's nothing. This is something to be reused somewhere else. And just as a quick note, if you did decide to go the Sass route instead of the SCSS route, it's a little bit faster in this case to write them. If I go and jump over, you can see it's just an equal sign and then the name of the mixin. So there's no, you don't have to write mixin itself. You just do an equal sign and then you write whatever name you want with no spaces. So now, because there's nothing that's coming out, as I said, it's like a placeholder. If we want to use it somewhere, we have to write at and then include. And then I write mixin name. And now my body will get color red on it. So a popular way to use mixins is, say, a button. So if I do @mixin space and then button, then I can write in my display inline block, some padding on there, 0.75 m, 1.5 m, text, and my decoration none. And then I can do my button primary at include button and then background of pink, let's just say. And then this will come out. Now, if you might be going, well, we already looked at how to do this with extends, and yeah, there's an important difference between a mix and an extend though, is here when I do my button secondary at include button and background yellow, you can see that it's not combining the similar CSS anywhere, it's just repeating it all over again. Now, we're not generally looking at the CSS file, but this does create a heavier CSS file because there's lots of extra lines of code that you wouldn't get with extends. It's not the end of the world though, because of some things we're going to look at much later on, but you can do different things to negate that difference in some of the more advanced lessons. You can also use these inside of media queries, and they also accept arguments, which we're going to be looking at shortly, and those are the two things that really push mixins to a different level when you compare them to extends. So one interesting thing about mixins is you can actually have selectors inside of a mixin. So here I've placed a just an example mixin with a button, let's say, inside of it. So now if I do my include and I write example, even if I don't write anything, it is outputting CSS because I told it that inside of here there should be some CSS. So even all there is here, this is the only thing, include example, is outputting this. So mixins can actually output CSS. It just depends on how they're written and what's written inside of them. Now, this might be a bit of a weird example, and you might be going, well, why would I use that? And you're a little bit right. But you could actually use this in interesting ways. For one, you know, here it's giving me the button, but say I had something where I had a call to action. Background is red, or yeah, let's just say it's red. I don't know why I'd want my button to have the same color as the thing it's in, but it's just you know, we're just going for a little example here. But then if I did an @include example, it's going to say that my button inside my call to action looks like this. So I wouldn't normally have that. So here I have my call to action and then my call to action button. So that's just one way we could use an include that does have a selector inside of it. Something that might be a little bit more common, or something, you know, that you might see a bit more, is let's say I have a site that has a little bit of CSS already. So I'm going to load that in. So an example of this type of thing that you might actually see or use in the real world is a case like this. where say you already have a little bit of styling, and then we come and make a mix-in. So I'm going to bring my mix-in all the way at the top here. So we're going to call it mix-in highlighter. Or just call it highlight, I guess, highlight. And what this mix-in is going to do is highlight things. So then say I did the color, and in this case, the background color is going to be the same color as my link itself. Now, then this would be, say, something I could place on spans. It's a class that I'm going to add in a second. So if the color is the same as my link color, but what if there's a link in there? Well, then I could say if there's a link inside of here, that link is going to get a color of, and we'll go with just, we'll just say black for now. Doesn't really matter since we're not outputting anything. So then what I could do is I could come and create that highlight class. So highlight is at include highlight. So then I could use this on my site anywhere I wanted to. So I could have it on a span, for example, or I might have a button highlight or a few other things where maybe it could be used. And it's going to output that. And I'm also getting the link color with that as well at the same time. And then say, I don't know, my footer, for some reason, I want to set it up the same way at include highlight. And then I could be repeating that over in some other places as well. So it's just to show that it will output, it's going to output whatever I need it to output. And don't forget, we also do have our parent selector that we can use that can make this even more useful. So then I could do my ampersand for the parent selector and hover. So when I'm hovering on my A, the color becomes yellow, let's say. So it's going to create all of that there because I'm including it here. And because I'm also including it in my footer, it's going to include it also with my footer right here. So yeah, just a few of the options of how we can push mix-ins a little bit more, but the real magic is going to start in the next video where we look at arguments. So arguments are one of the things that make mix-ins just really incredible, and I think this is really going to show you why people love mix-ins so much. So we're going to go back to my button example just because this is something that you'll definitely use in the real world guaranteed, and I think it's really clear how it works when we look at it like this. So this is more or less what we had before when we did our button example. So here I made my mix-in, and then when I want my primary button, I have to say I'm including all of this and then define my background and my color. Instead of doing it that way though, I can create arguments. So here after button, I can open and close some parentheses. So open and close. And then inside the parentheses, I'm including arguments. So here I'm going to create two different ones. I'm going to create one called color and another one called background. You'll notice that the arguments look a lot like variables, and they pretty much are. They're effectively undefined variables that are scoped to this mix-in only. In other words, we're telling the mix-in that we want to have these special variables that only exist within it, and I can tell it what I want them to be. I can come here, so I'm saying I have a color and a background. So what I can do is I can say that my color is going to be color, and my background is going to be my BG. And so here I'm telling it where I want to use those variables. But how do you define them? Well, it's really easy. I just come in here and I write them inside of the parentheses over here now. So you can see at the moment I'm getting an error, and that's because I've included some arguments and I'm not defining them anywhere. I'm not telling them what I want these to be, so it means the Sass can't output. It's not working. So what I can do is I can come here and I can write color is red, and then put a comma, and then write background is blue. And now it's output color red and background blue. And you'll notice up here and down here, I comma separated them. It's important that you comma separate these. If not, it's not going to work. You can't do it with just spaces, and you can't do it with semicolons. For these, it's important that they are comma separated for it to work. And then I could have my secondary button, and I could have this be yellow and green. And you can see how this is much easier and cleaner to write. And this can be nice and easy to use. And it's just really, really cool. And we're going to see even they get better than this. So we're going to keep on looking at these. You can give arguments a default value. And this is great because it lets you have an argument which you can control. But by giving it a default, you can omit it and it's just going to fall back to the default value when you want it to. So This is really, really handy if you have something where you're often using the same value, but every now and then you want to change it. So for example, let's create a mixin for border radius. So border radius. And I'm going to give this a BR here, like we saw before. And like that. So I have a mixin of border radius, and we're just going to have this say border radius is BR. So now if I come down and I wanted to use this on different elements, I would have to define what it is. So if I said let's say it's a modal, and I use include border radius, well, I get an error, right? We saw this in the last one because I'm not telling it what that is. I'd have to come here and I'd have to say that BR is 10 pixels, let's say. And now all of a sudden it's working. And that's good. But if you're using the same thing here all the time, it can be annoying to have to retype that each time. So what I can do is I can come up to here and actually say that there's a default. It's 10 pixels. So now, just by writing @include border radius, it's giving it the border radius of 10 pixels. I think right away you can see the value in this. So maybe I also have an alert box, and that has an @include border radius. And that's awesome. But then maybe I have a profile picture. And I want the profile picture to have a border radius, but I want it to be a circle. So I want it to have a border radius of 50%. I can still do an @include border radius. And now I can just say that BR is actually 50%. And that works. So what this is doing is this is overwriting the default value that I defined at the top. And this is super, super useful because it lets me write really nice, concise CSS or Sass where I don't even have to worry about it. But at certain times I can come and overwrite that for specific things without having to write either a new mixin or just write in some, regular old CSS, because we don't want to be doing that if we don't have to, right? So yeah, I think this is, it's really useful having default arguments because a lot of the time you're going to want consistency anyway, and it just saves you having to write some extra stuff along the way. Now, sometimes you're going to have mixins that have lots of arguments like I do here for my box shadow mixin that I just made. In it, you can see that I have a vertical offset, a horizontal offset, a blur, a spread, and a color. So that's a lot of different things, and I've had to shrink this side of things down just because either it's going to have a word wrap on or things are going to disappear off the side. So if you do have a lot, there's nothing wrong with, you do need them to be comma separated still, but you can just come through and give them each their own line just to make your life a little bit easier on being able to see them. And you can tab them over and set them up however you want, just so you can easily see your arguments if you do have a lot of them. So that's one thing that can really help you out. So in this case, you can see that I have all those defaults. So say I had my box, and this box has an @include box shadow. Right away, it just will work. I have a nice box shadow on there. And as we know, I can overwrite values in here as well by writing them in. So say I wanted to overwrite my vertical offset. I could just come on here and say vertical offset is actually 100 pixels. And now my vertical offset, which is my first value, gets overwritten from 0 and becomes 100 pixels. But if I know the order of things, I don't even have to write in the name of the variable. I could just come in here, and let's say I wanted it to be 10 and 10 and a blur of 20. So I could write 10 pixels, comma, 20 pixels, comma, 20 pixels, comma, I don't know, a 50 pixel spread, and it's going to be red. So whether or not you have defaults, if I didn't have any defaults, this would still work the same way. If I just comma separate them and I follow the same order that they exist here, they're going to come out and it's going to work perfectly fine. And because I do have defaults, if I ignore these last two, I just do 10, 20, 20, it's going to do 10, 10, or 10, 20, and 20. And you can see those there, and then these ones stick with the defaults. Now, the one thing that's important with this is that it has to be in order. So say I wanted the color to be red, I can't just come in here and write red. If I'm skipping it, well, I can't skip it because that's making my vertical offset red, which doesn't make sense. CSS and Sass aren't smart enough to know that red would only be a valid one for my color. It just doesn't work that way. So if I did want to skip all of them, I want to keep all of these exactly the same, and I only want to overwrite the color, that's where I could write color. And so it's going to keep all of these the same way my defaults were, and now I'm just overwriting the last one. And I could come in here and I could say that my horizontal offset is 10 pixels. And even though they're in the wrong order now, because I'm telling it which ones I'm overwriting, then it's going to work fine and there's no issue at all. So this is just a nice way if you have a big long mix-in like this, really nice just to be able to come in and say box shadow 10 pixels, 10 pixels. And you're controlling that, or even just like a 0, 0, 20 pixel because you need a bigger blur or something like that. It can be a lot faster to do that, or even just to come in here and write blur and just control the one that you want to be controlling. Just one quick word on the default arguments and not having default arguments. Sometimes you mix it up a little bit. So you might have something like this with your add include box shadow, but you don't want to have a default for color for whatever reason. And so you just don't include one. You might get an error. So this is saying that required arguments must come before optional arguments. And it's calling these optional because I've already placed a value on them. So because these have defaults, it means I don't have to write them in when I'm including my box shadow. Whereas color, I have to define it. So it's just saying that the required ones that have to be written out must come first. So I have to have color first. And if I have color first, then I don't have any more problems. And no comma at the end. Now I'm getting an error because I'm not defining color, but that's easy enough to fix. Red. And then it comes through like that. So it's just to say that if you have ones that are not defined, and then you have other ones where you are giving them defaults, the undefined one has to come first. Or if you have 3 undefined ones and then one that has a default, all the undefined ones must come first, followed by the ones that have the defaults. And just as a little tip also, even if you have something like box shadow, you can see that color's the first one I'm putting, but it's still coming out at the end. So say you often, even if I did black on this, black, and I'm always coming through and my 95% of my box shadows are using this, but I'm changing my color constantly. You might as well put color as your first variable, so you can just write box shadow red. Then I could have, box 2 at include box shadow blue, for example. So then I just have to put whatever color I want, and I don't have to worry about anything else. And I can just make things a little bit easier. So it doesn't matter what order they are here, you can have them output in any order you want once you get into how you're using those arguments in the way you're writing your rules. Okay guys, so it is challenge time. So what I'm going to be doing now is showing you what the end result should be. There's also these files to download, so you can download the starting point, which will give you a CSS file like this, the HTML that you're looking at now, and not very much else. And it's going to be your job to create some mix-ins to do what I'm about to show you what they do. And in the download, you're also going to get a PDF that has an in-detailed explanation of all the steps that I want you to do. So this video is just a quick show of what you should be doing, but there's much more detail in sort of the different things I'm expecting your mix-ins to do. And it might be a bit easier to follow along with that since it'll be right in front of you and you don't have to sort of rewind a video while you're working or anything like that. So I've already created my mix-ins. They're all the way at the top of my file, and I'm not going to show those to you because then it wouldn't be much of a challenge. The first one is to create a gradient, a mix-in that you can use to create gradients. So what I want you to do is once you set up your file and you've compiled this CSS folder into a regular CSS folder, you should get your file looking like this, just because there is no CSS file to start with. And then in here, I want you to come and start editing or adding your own Sass to the file. So I'm going to do an at include, and I called this gradient because it makes it easy. And I'm going to give this, I have different colors. So let's say I go, and I have a few colors saved off screen here just to make life easier. Color 1, color 2. And then if I leave it like that, oh, and then we need also a degree. So let's just say 45 degrees. And I'm going to save my file. I'm going to refresh over here. And now you can see that I have that very beautiful gradient going on right there. So then I could take the same thing for section 1 and do this for section 2. And I could just go and change my colors. So let's make these ones some blue colors. Save that. I'm going to refresh, and now I have a gradient over there. And just for fun, let's change this to 150 degrees, just so it's at a different angle. So now you can see it's going this way instead. Also, you'd want to do that for section 3, just to make sure that everything is working properly. Okay, the next thing I want you to do is make a mixin for a pseudo element. So I'm going to do a title, and it's only going to be for the after pseudo element. So this should automatically make an after pseudo element when you use it. So I'm going to do an at include. And I'm calling mine pseudo in this case. And in this, I'm giving it a width, a height, and a background color. So width would be, let's do 100 pixels. Let's give it a height of 1, or let's do a bit bigger. We can see it on screen, 5 pixels. And we'll give it a background of black, just so we have a color there. I'll save that. I'll hit refresh. And now you can see that has come on all of my titles. So I get that little underline thing. So on here, I don't have to write it with these because I'm putting them in that order, but I'm just showing that you could if you're more comfortable writing it that way. So here, if I made this 1 pixel and then 150 pixels, let's say, let's refresh. So a nice easy way to create a pseudo element. It's a little bit tricky, so you're gonna have to think about this one a little bit to get it just to pump in exactly like this. But yeah, try your best. And of course, if ever you get stuck on something, ask around on the Slack channel or in other places to try and get a little bit of help. But do try hard at this one to see if you can get it. So one thing with this pseudo element one is these are only the 3 variables arguments that I want it to be able to accept, but there should be some hard set things, because you should know that with a pseudo element, you can't just create one with these 3 properties. There's other ones that are needed. So those are hard coded into there. They can't be changed. And the same thing with my button here that I'm going to create. So I'm going to say button 1, and I'm going to do an at include button, and I'm just going to give this 4 properties. And I'm going to do each one on its own line. Let's just do red, yellow, green, blue. And what I'm setting these as is my color, my background color, my hover color, and my hover background color. So if I save that and refresh, there's my yellow button with red text. And on hover, you can see it's taking these second 2 ones here. So nice and easy to do. Now, so there is a trick to this just in getting the hover color to work. So first you can build it out just to get your button to work. And then you could try and come back and add the hover color after if you're not really sure how you can build it all into one single mixin. And I'm just putting them all on each line because it's easier for you guys to see on the screen, I think, because I just didn't want them to go off the side. But you can, just as easily write it all out just like that. And it will work fine. So yeah, there's the 3 different mixins that I'm asking you to build. So good luck on that. Once again, if you get stuck, don't be shy. Come and ask over at the Slack channel. Sass comes with lots of pre-existing functions, many of them which are very useful, many of them which you'll probably never use. You can also create your own functions to use in your code as well, but we'll get to that later on. For now, let's explore how we can use some of the pre-existing functions. So the syntax for a function in Sass is pretty simple, and well, you've written stuff like this before, really. It's pretty much just function name, and then you write some stuff inside the brackets. And things like this that you would have already done, well, you've already seen RGBA stuff, right? So RGBA, and there's the name, and then you put some stuff in there. So it's very similar to that. So, when we write stuff in, so it's function name, and then inside of there, we're writing stuff like value 1, value 2, and it's going to do stuff with value 1, and it's going to, take something from here, and do something with the values that you're giving it. Some functions will take 1, some will take 5. There's different stuff that you can be doing. It pumps out a value pretty much that gets compiled into the real CSS. Now, a real example of this is their complement function. So let's say we have here our body, and on there I want to do a background color, and I want it to be the complement of red. So I can write complement red. And the complement is cyan. Or if I put in cyan, it'll come out as red because they're opposite of each other on the color wheel. Now, it doesn't have to be cyan or red. It could be an actual thing here. So I could put in something like F3A, and it's going to give me the complement over there. And you might be going, why would I want the complement value, and what does this really serve me? And well, this is one of those functions you might not actually use very much. Let's go explore some of my favorite functions in the next video. There are some functions I use more often than others, and there's some that I never use, like the complement one we just looked at. In this video, it's a quick rundown of my favorites, and I love them because they let me work a lot faster. And the first one I want to look at is RGBA. And you might be going, well, I've already used RGBA, and it's not really a function, it's just something that's part of CSS, and it is, but it's also a Sass function, oddly enough. So say you have a component and you want it to have a background color, and you want that background color to be transparent. So you want it to be transparent black. You used to have to write it all out like that and then do like a 0.5. Not that bad, but still it's kind of annoying. And if it was white, it'd be even worse because you have to do 255, 255, 255. So that's exporting exactly what you would expect it to. You can see it is actually changing things a little bit here. It's adding spaces, 0.5 instead of 0.5. But I can actually take all of these first things out and put in a black, and it's going to export that. It's going to take whatever color I put here, turn it into RGB, and then bring it over here. So I can take white, and it works there. And of course, if I had a variable of, let's say, color, and I have a nice color here, like that, I could take my color here, and it's going to give the RGB value of it and make it a transparent background. So that's really, really cool. A nice, easy way so you don't actually have to worry about RGB values anymore, which is amazing. You can also lighten and darker colors, and this works well, but it can be a little finicky. It's really easy to have a color turn to pure white or pure black with this, but I still like to use it from time to time. So here I could say my color is, let's darken it first. So we could say darken, and I'm going to say, let's darken my color that I already have there. And this time it's not a decimal though, it's a number between 0 and 100. So if I put 50, it's going to darken it by 50%. So you can see it's changed this into that hex color because it's darkening it by 50%. And if I go to 60 here, I'm wondering, we're getting pretty close. So 70 will probably hit us into black. Now where this worked out well, because it was a pretty light color, but just to show you, if I was doing a lighten, it's turning into pure white right now. But even if I have a small, I'm only lightening it by 30%, it's pure white. 20%. Now we're okay. So you sort of, and you're going to see with some colors that you'd expect to be okay, it just washes them out completely. It's a nice way for hover effects if you want to lighten or darken things just subtly. I find it works really well though. Another way you can get a similar result is actually using the mix function though. And this is nice because you can control more of how it's actually working. So let's delete this here, and I'm going to use mix instead. So with mix, you're going to choose two colors. So let's say I'm doing my color and white. So this is sort of like doing a lighten. What it's doing is it's doing 50% of my color and 50% of white, mixing it together, and this is what pumps out on the other end. Now this is kind of cool, but the nice thing with this is I can also control how much the mix is, because right now it's 50% of this and 50% of this. But if I put a comma, and I can put how much I want it to mix by. So if I left a 50 here, it would be working exactly the same. But if I were to change this to 100, you'd see it's actually this color which is outputting here. Because what this means is it's 100% of my color and 0% white. And if I switch this to 0, it's going to be 0% of my color and 100% of white. So a 25 would be 25% of my color and 75% of white. Or switch that around, 75% of my color, 25% of white. I think you get the picture at this point. The cool thing with this is you don't have to use white or black. You can mix two of your own colors together. So if you're after a subtle gradient or something like that, this can work really, really well. Another thing that can work really, really well with creating gradients is the adjust hue So adjust hue lets us rotate on the hue wheel, the color wheel. We can rotate around it. So let's change my background color here to a linear gradient, because this is where I find it's the most useful. And what you can do on this is we can use adjust hue. So in this, I'm going to choose my color. So let's choose my color that I've created. And what I want to do is I want to adjust it by a certain degree. So we have 360 degrees to play with. We're on the color wheel. The smaller the number, the less it will change. So if you have a solid background and you want a subtle gradient, just write in a pretty small change, like say 25 degrees. Now that's not adjust hue color, and I need a second color on here. And just so you can see, actually, we can see right away that has output, so it's still really similar. Instead of 66DDFF, it's now 669DFF, so it's really close. If I were to change this 180, we'd get a completely different color because it's swinging over to the other side of the color wheel. So adjust hue, so you might do something like color, comma, adjust hue. So you're getting it from your original color to a slight variation of that color. So it's a nice way we can use adjust hue without having to create new variables for these little minor differences that you might be making. But otherwise, I don't think there's a huge use for it, but just for subtle color changes that you might want to use, I think it's a nice little trick that you can do. Now, there are many other functions, some of which you might find really useful. So I encourage you to explore what they have as well. I put the link down below to where you can get access to a lot of them. And you'll notice that some of them might seem really strange or weird, and in general, a lot of these are actually used for more advanced things, some of which we won't even be covering. Some of them are just stuff that I honestly I haven't figured out how to use it in my own workflow, but these are the ones I tend to use the most often, and if you can find cool ways to use the other ones, that'd be awesome, and if you do find some in there that you like, make sure you share it over in the Slack group. And don't forget, we can also make our own functions, but that's going to come on in later lessons. Right now, we just want to play around with the ones that they're providing us with. Okay, so let's get started on building this out. This video is just going to be focused on the HTML and nothing else. In the next one, we're going to fire up our Sass and worry about all of that. So far, what do I have? I just have the image that I've given you guys in this, which is the picture of my t-shirt. And I have my index.html with nothing in here except a title. So I'm going to come into my body here, and I think what we're going to do is actually zoom out a little, move this over, and make this a little bit bigger, just like that. So what are we going to do? We're just going to have, all I'm worried about here is my card. So let's have a div class of card, and let's worry about what we're putting in here. So if we look at the different pieces we have in here, I have my t-shirt on the side, I have my title, this sort of a my price, a little description, a button, another button over here that just is an add to wish list, and this is the hover effect that I'd be going after. So in here, I'm going to do an H2, and I'm going to give it the name card title, and I will be using the BEM naming convention, which is something I'm going to talk more about in the later on workflow videos, but just so you get a bit of a taste. So I have my card, and then the double underscore means this is a part of this component. It's something that lives inside of my card component, and we're going to use Sass and the ampersand in a really fun way with this once we get to the Sass part. So here my H2 is good, so this is just going to be really nice shirt, and I'm using an H2 just because I'm assuming this is part of a bigger website and the H1 is being used for something else. But for something like this in isolation, it doesn't matter too much, and maybe H2 is not realistic either. Let's come in and do my image now. So it'd be image class is equal to, and I like putting my classes at the beginning just in case I'm changing them, and it also makes it easier for me to see them as I'm reading through everything. The URL is less important. Let's call this card image, and the href src is going to be image/t-shirt.png. Good. And then we have our price. So I'm just going to do everything else as a paragraph. This will be card double underscore price. And the price is $49.99, except the 99 here should be wrapped in a span because it's much smaller than everything else, right? So span, well, let's do 99 like that then, since it closed it off for me. And then I'm gonna have a P. What are we gonna call this one? P card descript. Let's just do desk for short for description. And this is just some lorem ipsum. Copy that, paste it in there. I don't know why I set this up to be on multiple lines. I generally will just do a paragraph like that. Same with my price, actually. That can all makes it just a little cleaner for me. Anyway, card price. Then we need my 2 card buttons. So this is going to be a href is equal to a class first. This could be card button, but I'm just going to call it a button because I'm assuming all over the site there's buttons. And it's going to be a button. We want to modify this button. It's not a normal button. So it's a button accent, let's say. Whoops. And the href, we have nowhere for it to go, but we'll still give it a blank href. Add to cart. Oh, I put card. It should be cart. Okay. And here again, going back to the BEM naming convention, I'm double hyphening it instead of double underscoring it because this is a modifier of button. These are subcomponents of my main component. This is a modifier of my button. So the modifier gets the double hyphen to say that it's a modifier and not a subcomponent of something. And this is useful when you're doing stuff. It just makes things like this stand out. A class equals btn. I think I'm just going to leave it as btn. Maybe we want like a button empty on it or a button invisible. I don't know. But we'll leave it like that. Add to wish list. And of course we need the href on that one as well. And I think that's all the markup done. Nice and simple and not too much to it. So we have our main card that is taking up the whole thing. Then we have the title at the top, the t-shirt, the price, the description, and our 2 buttons. And yeah, that's it. So let's move on to actually writing some CSS and firing up Sass and all of that. All right, so let's come in here and I'm going to go to my file structure over here and make a new folder called SCSS. And in my SCSS folder, let's make a new file and I'll just call it main.scss. And with that created, let's open up my terminal here. So however you are doing it, whether it's through terminal or PowerShell or whatever it is that you are using. And let's get Sass going. So I'm going to write Sass space hyphen watch. And of course we can't see it because I'm zoomed in, so it sort of screws up things. Sass watch, and I want to watch my SCSS folder and output to my CSS folder and hit return. And I believe that worked. I have a CSS folder now, and it has everything I need in there. So awesome. So with that going, should be running in the background. Everything should be working. We can start trying to make this page. So let me go and open up that file. And there we go. So that is what we'd put together last time, and now we're ready to start making it look the way we want it to. So of course, one thing you don't want to forget to do is also link to your styles. So let's create that now. The href is css/main.css. So you can get all the colors in the file that I provided you that has the text and sort of the styles and everything in there. In this one, well, we've got our Sass going. We've got our Sass set up. And let's just test to make sure that it's actually working by doing one nice simple thing. And I like doing this if I'm just building out one single thing. And actually, let's just come in here and give our card width of, I don't know, let's just try 600 pixels and a background of green for now. Save that. I should refresh. There we go. So we can see my card has the width of 600 pixels. On your body, you can give it a height of 100 VH, because if you don't have enough content to fill your whole body, even though a background color would actually fill it all, the body's still technically stopping here, so my next steps wouldn't really work properly. Give it a display of flex, and then give it a justify content center, and an align items center. I do this on my code pens all the time, just so I can have my item right in the middle. Do not do this on most pages you work on. It's not what you really want to be doing, but just if you have one little component that you want centered on the page, on a pen or something like that, we can do it this way. So we're good to go and start setting up all our variables.